On Father's Day, my son came to visit and asked how I liked the $3,600 his wife sends me every month. I looked him dead in the eye and whispered that I had not received a single dollar in over a year. Right then, his elegant wife walked into the room. "My name is Stanley. I am 69 years old, and I spent 40 years pouring concrete and laying masonry across the brutal winters of Chicago." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who underestimated your intellect. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my living room floor. Evan sat opposite me on the leather sofa. He spent the first 20 minutes adjusting the cuffs of his tailored charcoal suit and checking his expensive watch. I paid for his undergraduate degree and his law school tuition by working double shifts on construction sites until my hands bled and my back ached. My late wife Gwen and I built a commercial property trust from nothing to ensure our only son would never have to touch a trowel or breathe in toxic cement dust. He was a highly successful corporate attorney now. He looked around my modest home with a strange mix of pride and mild discomfort, as if my working-class roots were an embarrassing stain on his polished life. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. He asked me how I was enjoying the $3,600 monthly transfer from the Southside Commercial Property Trust. He spoke with the casual arrogance of a man who believes he is solely responsible for his family's wealth. He mentioned that the commercial rental market was booming downtown, and the trust was yielding excellent dividends under his wife's management. I sat perfectly still in my armchair. I did not blink. I felt a sudden cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I looked directly at my son and stated with absolute clarity that I had not received a single deposit from the trust in over 14 months. The air in the room grew instantly heavy. The ambient noise of the ceiling fan seemed to vanish. Evan frowned deeply, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He opened his mouth to demand an explanation, but the sharp sound of ice clinking against glass interrupted him. Samira walked into the room carrying a polished silver tray with a crystal pitcher of iced tea. The heavy diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered sharp reflections across the walls. She is a woman who wears her wealth like armor. She stopped dead in the center of the Persian rug. She had heard my accusation clearly. Her posture stiffened for a fraction of a second. Samira did not drop the tray. She did not gasp or show any sign of fear. She expertly pivoted her demeanor in the blink of an eye. She placed the silver tray on my solid oak coffee table with deliberate, agonizing care. She tilted her head and adopted a look of profound, patronizing pity. She looked at Evan and then directed her gaze back at me. She said my name with a sickly sweet tone that made my blood run cold. She told Evan I was simply confused. She claimed we had spoken about a minor banking delay just last week on the phone. I sat frozen in my chair. I had not spoken to Samira in over a month. I remember every conversation I have. My mind is sharper than the steel rebar I used to lay in the city foundations. I stated plainly that we never had that conversation. Evan intervened immediately. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip felt suffocating and immensely condescending. He sided with his wife without a second thought. He gently reminded me that I missed a routine doctor appointment in May. He then brought up the garden hose I had supposedly left running all night on Tuesday. The puzzle pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying precision. The running hose was not a foolish accident of an old man. Samira had visited my property on Tuesday afternoon while I was buying lumber at the hardware store. She had deliberately staged the incident to build a documented narrative of my mental decline. She was laying the psychological groundwork to invalidate my word. She poured a glass of iced tea and handed it to me with a victor's smile. She suggested it was just a bank error and promised to call the branch manager the very next day to sort it out. She told me to relax and enjoy Father's Day without stressing my fragile heart. I chose absolute silence. Arguing is a defensive tactic. A man who defends himself automatically validates the false accusation. I took the cold glass from her hand and nodded slowly. I told her perhaps it was just a bank error. Evan exhaled a massive sigh of relief. He sat back down and began talking about a new corporate promotion. Samira smiled triumphantly and checked her phone. They left exactly an hour later. They did not notice I never drank the tea. I stood by the front window and watched their luxury sport utility vehicle pull out of my driveway and disappear down the quiet suburban street. I did not pick up the phone to call my son and demand the truth. A son who implicitly trusts a fabricated lie over his own father is a compromised asset. I walked directly down the hallway to my study. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood. I sat at my heavy mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I navigated to my secure banking portal and entered my credentials. I pulled up the transaction history for my primary checking account. I scrolled back through the months of data tracing every deposit and withdrawal. The truth stared back at me in cold digital numbers on the glowing screen. The last direct deposit from the family trust was dated 14 months ago. Samira had not just missed a single payment or delayed a routine transfer due to a banking error. She had systematically intercepted over $50,000 of my rightful retirement income. The theft was deliberate, calculated, and ongoing. The conflict had escalated entirely from a simple lie into aggressive financial exploitation. I connected my laptop to the laser printer. I printed every single bank statement from the past 2 years. The printer hummed loudly and spit out page after page of undeniable legal proof. I gathered the warm papers and placed them inside a thick manila folder. I aligned the edges perfectly. The first layer of their dark deception was fully exposed, but the true depth of the rot remained hidden in the shadows. I needed maximum leverage. I needed to understand exactly how she was moving the capital without triggering a bank alert. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. I did not feel sorrow or heartbreak. I felt the cold, familiar resolve of a man preparing to pour a massive foundation. I was preparing for a brutal war. I drove my heavy truck through the early morning city traffic. The winter sky was an unforgiving sheet of gray iron. I pulled into the parking structure of First National Bank precisely at 9 o'clock. I knew this building intimately. My concrete company poured the foundation for this very structure in the late 80s. I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors. The polished marble floors reflected the sterile fluorescent lights overhead. I ignored the long line of customers and bypassed the junior tellers entirely. I walked directly toward the glass-walled back office at the back of the branch. The brass nameplate read, Thomas Vance, Senior Branch Manager. I opened the door without knocking. Thomas was a young executive who wore expensive cologne and suits that were cut a little too tight. He looked up from his dual monitors. His initial annoyance vanished the exact moment he recognized my face. He stood up immediately and extended a manicured hand across his pristine desk. I ignored the hand and took the heavy leather chair opposite him. I instructed him to pull up the complete, unedited ledger for the Southside Commercial Property Trust. Thomas offered a nervous practice smile. He sat back down and adjusted his silk tie. He assumed my unannounced visit was a celebratory check-in. He congratulated me on the massive capital acquisition. He said my elegant daughter-in-law had spoken highly of my decision to leverage the equity for the family's future. I did not correct him. I did not display a single ounce of shock or anger. A man who reveals his ignorance to a banker immediately loses control of the negotiation. I kept my posture rigid and my face completely devoid of emotion. I told Thomas I simply wanted to review the final execution of the paperwork to ensure the legal parameters were strictly followed. Thomas eagerly tapped his keyboard, desperate to please a high-net-worth client. He had absolutely no idea he was facilitating the autopsy of a colossal financial crime. I watched the reflection of the financial spreadsheets scrolling across his designer glasses. The silence in the office was thick and heavy. I waited for the digital numbers to validate the sickening suspicion growing in my chest. Samira had made a move, and I was about to discover the full, devastating scale of her ambush. Thomas turned the large flat-screen monitor toward me. The digital rows of numbers glowed with brutal clarity. Samira had not merely skimmed my $3,600 in monthly rent. She had weaponized her legal position as the primary trustee to execute a $2 million equity line of credit against the property. The historic Southside complex was a block of commercial storefronts I bought for pennies in 1995. My late wife Gwen and I spent 5 grueling years renovating it by hand. We scraped decades of grime off the brickwork to ensure our son would inherit a bulletproof financial legacy. Samira had cracked that vault wide open. I traced the transaction history with a steady finger. She had initiated the final catastrophic drawdown last Friday. $2 million vanished from the trust in a single wire transfer. I asked Thomas to specify the exact external destination of the withdrawn capital. He clicked a few more buttons and confirmed the funds were routed directly into a corporate holding account registered to Samira's luxury retail business. She owned a high-end fashion boutique in the affluent part of the city. I immediately understood the magnitude of her desperation. You do not siphon $2 million from a secure family trust unless your own business is drowning in debt. Her boutique was a glittering facade masking a massive financial sinkhole. She had mortgaged my life's work to plug a leak in her failing vanity project. She used the cash to maintain her illusion of success among her wealthy socialite friends. Thomas smiled, completely oblivious to the felony he was outlining. He noted that the transfer cleared perfectly, and the bank was thrilled to facilitate such a substantial business expansion. I felt a cold, calculated rage harden my ribs. Samira had played a highly dangerous game. She assumed my old age equated to blindness. She believed I was a relic who would never understand the complexities of modern banking. She thought I would sit quietly in my armchair while she drained my legacy to zero. I did not raise my voice. I did not shatter the illusion. I asked Thomas to proceed to the authorization documents. I needed to see the exact weapon she used to bypass the banking security protocols. I needed to know how deep the betrayal ran within my own bloodline. I instructed Thomas to display the final authorization signature. The family trust explicitly required dual authorization for any capital withdrawal exceeding $50,000. Samira could not have executed this massive loan independently. Thomas nodded cheerfully and pulled up the digitized legal document of the loan agreement. He zoomed in on the bottom of the final page. Evan's signature sat boldly on the designated line authorizing the complete liquidation of our family's equity. I stared at the black digital ink. The letters were sweeping, elegant, and slanted sharply to the right. It was a flawless aesthetic match to the signature on file. But I am the man who taught Evan how to write his name. When my son was 7 years old, he fell from a tree in our backyard and shattered his right collarbone. He was forced to learn how to do absolutely everything with his left hand. He is strictly, undeniably left-handed. When Evan signs his name, he anchors the pen heavily on the downward stroke, creating distinct, sharp indentations. The signature glowing on the monitor was entirely devoid of that heavy left-handed pressure. It was a fluid, right-handed forgery. Samira had carefully forged my son's signature to bypass the banking security measures. Evan was completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had just saddled him with a $2 million federal debt. He was blindly defending the woman who had effectively ruined his financial future just 24 hours earlier. I looked away from the screen. I commanded Thomas to print every single document, every transfer receipt, and every signature page. He complied immediately, handing me a thick stack of warm paper. I placed the documents into my leather briefcase. I thanked Thomas for his thorough assistance and walked out of his office. I exited the bank and stepped back into the freezing morning air. The initial shock of the betrayal evaporated, leaving behind a sharp, tactical clarity. I had the printed proof of massive federal wire fraud. I walked toward my truck, already plotting my next legal strike. I reached into my old wallet to retrieve my personal debit card to pay the automated parking kiosk. I was ready to initiate my defense and reclaim my empire. The war was officially declared, and I was about to discover the full extent of Samira's preemptive strike against me. I maneuvered my truck out of the parking structure using the $50 bill I kept stashed in the glove compartment for emergencies. The drive back to my neighborhood felt longer than usual. The familiar streets and oak trees offered no comfort. My mind was calculating the exact trajectory of Samira's legal strike. She had orchestrated this operation with the precision of a seasoned predator. Freezing the accounts was only the first maneuver in a much larger offensive strategy. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. The house I had owned for 30 years stood before me. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air felt unnaturally still. The quiet sanctuary of my home had been transformed into an isolated holding cell. I needed to act immediately. I walked to the kitchen and picked up the heavy receiver of the landline to contact the fraud department of my secondary bank. I pressed the phone against my ear. There was no dial tone. There was only a hollow, unbroken silence. I pressed the receiver hook several times, but the line remained completely dead. I checked the router in the hallway. The green indicator lights were dark. The internet and the telephone lines had been systematically disconnected at the provider level. Samira had not merely cut my access to capital. She had severed my communication network. She was isolating me physically and digitally before I could mobilize a defense. I pulled my cellular phone from my pocket. It was a secondary line not tied to the primary family account. I had a single new email notification resting in my inbox. The sender address belonged to a corporate litigation firm I did not recognize. I opened the message. The subject line read, "Notice of Emergency Temporary Conservatorship." My heart beat steadily against my ribs as I read the attached legal document. Samira and Evan had filed a petition in the county court late yesterday afternoon. They were requesting immediate and total control over my personal finances, my medical decisions, and my physical autonomy. They had explicitly petitioned a judge to declare me an incapacitated adult. The affidavit attached to the petition outlined a fabricated narrative of my supposed mental collapse. They claimed I was suffering from severe rapid-onset dementia. The document listed numerous instances of me allegedly wandering the neighborhood in a state of confusion. It stated I was unable to manage basic financial transactions and that I had become a severe danger to myself. The legal filing was a meticulous work of absolute fiction. They were weaponizing the judicial system to strip away my human rights and legally bind my hands before I could expose the forged $2 million loan. I scrolled down to the final page of the affidavit to view the medical authorization. The document required the signature of a licensed medical professional to validate the claim of cognitive decline. The signature belonged to a Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never met a man named Dr. Thorne in my entire 69 years of life. I had not stepped foot in a clinic in over 8 months. Samira and Evan had not merely exaggerated a medical condition. They had purchased a fraudulent diagnosis. They had found a corrupt physician willing to rubber stamp my commitment to a psychiatric facility without ever conducting a physical examination. The scope of their depravity was staggering. They intended to lock me inside a memory care ward and liquidate my remaining personal assets to cover the massive debt Samira had incurred. They believed they could discard me like broken machinery to save her failing retail boutique. The front doorbell rang with a sharp, sudden chime. I did not move immediately. I walked quietly to the front hallway and looked through the brass peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood squarely on my front porch. A white medical transport van idled near the curb behind their patrol car. Samira stood near the street wearing a tailored black dress. She was dabbing her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief while speaking in hushed tones to a paramedic. They were not waiting for a formal trial or a court hearing. They had arrived with a temporary emergency order to forcefully remove me from my home today. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury afforded only to prey. A man who panics surrenders his tactical advantage. I stepped away from the front door. I walked silently to the back of the house. I slipped out through the rear garden gate and navigated the dense, overgrown azalea bushes separating my property from the neighbor's yard. I crossed into the narrow concrete alleyway behind the houses. I left my back door completely unlocked. Let the officers and the paramedics search an empty fortress. I walked with a steady, determined pace down the alleyway. I walked for 3 miles navigating the back streets and avoiding the main thoroughfares. I reached a decaying strip mall on the edge of the industrial district. A rusted payphone stood outside a laundromat. I dropped 2 quarters into the slot and dialed a number I had committed to memory 20 years ago. The line rang 3 times before a sharp voice answered the call. I asked the receptionist to put Mitchell on the line immediately. I instructed her to tell him that Stanley needed to cash in the favor. I hung up the phone and waited in the shadow of the brick wall. The silent adjustment had moved from the planning phase into active combat. Samira and my son had forced my hand. They would soon understand the absolute devastation of underestimating an old bulldog. I stared at the glowing screen of my cellular phone. The digital ink on the attached medical affidavit was a masterpiece of clinical deception. The document was meticulously formatted on official letterhead from a downtown psychiatric clinic. It bore the signature and medical license number of a Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never spoken to a Dr. Thorne. I had never stepped foot inside his clinic. The affidavit detailed entirely fabricated episodes of aggressive outbursts and severe cognitive decline. It claimed I had repeatedly threatened my family members and was completely incapable of managing basic daily tasks. The narrative was designed to paint a portrait of a man rapidly descending into violent dementia. The most chilling section was the final paragraph. It explicitly authorized my immediate involuntary placement into a locked memory care facility for my own safety. Samira and Evan had not merely exaggerated a medical condition to gain sympathy. They had purchased a fraudulent diagnosis to legally obliterate my human rights. They found a corrupt physician willing to rubber stamp my commitment without ever conducting a physical or psychological examination. The magnitude of their betrayal was absolute. They intended to lock me inside a psychiatric ward and liquidate my remaining personal assets to cover the massive debt Samira had incurred against my commercial property. They believed they could discard me to save her failing vanity project. They assumed I was an isolated old man without the resources or the mental acuity to fight back. I closed the email and placed the phone in my pocket. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, calculated resolve harden my spine. The war had escalated from financial theft to physical imprisonment. A sudden heavy knock echoed against my solid oak front door. The sound was authoritative and demanding. I walked silently down the hallway and peered through the brass peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood squarely on my front porch. A specialized white medical transport van idled near the curb behind their patrol car. 2 paramedics in dark blue uniforms stood by the open rear doors of the van holding a heavy canvas restraint strap. Samira stood a few feet away on the sidewalk. She wore a tailored black dress appropriate for mourning. She was holding a silk handkerchief to her dry eyes, playing the role of a heartbroken daughter-in-law forced to hand over a sick man for his own good. She was performing for the officers and the curious neighbors peering from their windows. She had orchestrated this entire scene to ensure maximum public humiliation and absolute compliance. They were not waiting for a formal trial or a court hearing. They had arrived with an emergency judicial order to forcefully remove me from my home and strip me of my freedom today. The officers knocked again louder this time. One of them rested his hand on his utility belt. They were prepared to breach the door if I did not answer. Samira pointed a manicured finger toward the living room window, directing their attention. She was determined to execute her plan with ruthless efficiency. She believed she had trapped me inside the fortress I had built. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury afforded only to prey. A man who panics surrenders his tactical advantage immediately. I stepped away from the front door. I walked silently to the back of the house, grabbing a small canvas duffel bag from the hall closet. I quickly packed a single change of clothes, my passport, and my medication. I moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who spent 40 years navigating chaotic construction sites. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the patio. I slipped through the wooden garden gate and navigated the dense, overgrown azalea bushes separating my property from the neighbor's yard. I crossed into the narrow concrete alleyway behind the houses. I did not lock the back door. I abandoned the property entirely. Let the police officers and the paramedics search an empty fortress. Let Samira realize her prey had anticipated the ambush. I walked with a steady, determined pace down the alleyway, putting distance between myself and the flashing lights of the patrol car. I walked for 3 miles, navigating the back streets and avoiding the main thoroughfares where I might be spotted. I reached a decaying strip mall on the absolute edge of the industrial district. A rusted payphone stood outside a laundromat, buzzing with neon lights. I dropped 2 quarters into the slot and dialed a number I had committed to memory 20 years ago. The silent adjustment had moved from the planning phase into active combat. Samira and my son had forced my hand. They would soon understand the absolute devastation of underestimating an old bulldog. The rusted metal of the payphone receiver felt like a block of ice against my ear. I stood in the narrow shadow of the brick wall and watched a stray dog pick through an overflowing dumpster. The line clicked and Mitchell answered. His voice was sharp and impatient. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him my son and his wife had just attempted to forcefully commit me to a psychiatric ward to cover up a $2 million bank fraud. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Mitchell is not a man easily rattled. He is a ruthless corporate litigator who destroys rival companies for sport. He is also a man who owes his entire professional existence to my late wife. 30 years ago, Mitchell was a desperate young attorney facing imminent bankruptcy. No traditional bank would lend him the capital to start his own firm. Gwen saw a relentless hunger in him. She wrote him a personal check from our concrete business account to secure his first office lease. She told him to pay it back by being the sharpest shark in the water. He never forgot the debt. I told Mitchell the hunt had officially begun, and I required his immediate strategic assistance. He did not hesitate. He instructed me to avoid all public transit and stay completely off the main avenues. He gave me precise directions to the loading dock of his downtown high-rise. I hung up the heavy receiver. I pulled my jacket tight against the biting wind. I walked with my head down. I used the service alleys and industrial access roads to navigate toward the commercial center. I moved with the absolute invisibility of an old man the city had forgotten. The damp air chilled my bones, but the fire in my chest kept me moving forward. I was a ghost marching into a war zone. I reached the towering glass and steel structure of Mitchell's firm exactly 45 minutes later. I bypassed the marble lobby and the security desk entirely. I located the rusted service door in the back alley, perfectly hidden between two massive commercial dumpsters. I slipped inside the dark concrete corridor. I pressed the heavy industrial button for the freight elevator. The carriage arrived with a loud mechanical groan. It smelled heavily of industrial floor wax and engine grease. I rode it up to the 42nd floor. The metal doors slid open to reveal a pristine hallway lined with modern art and frosted glass. Mitchell stood waiting at the end of the corridor. He wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than my first work truck. He did not offer a handshake or a sympathetic smile. We walked directly into his corner office and he locked the heavy oak door behind us. I approached his massive mahogany desk. I opened my canvas duffel bag. I pulled out the manila folder containing the printed bank statements, the forged loan agreement, and the digital copy of the emergency conservatorship affidavit. I dropped the entire stack of documents onto the polished wood. Mitchell sat down and adjusted his reading glasses. He reviewed the paperwork with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned predator. He did not gasp. He did not express outrage. He simply analyzed the raw data. He traced the $2 million withdrawal directly to Samira's retail holding account. He examined the sweeping right-handed forgery of Evan's signature. Then he picked up the medical affidavit signed by Dr. Eris Thorne. Mitchell stopped reading. A dark, knowing smile spread across his face. He tossed the affidavit back onto the desk. He told me I was incredibly lucky Samira chose this specific doctor. He recognized the name instantly. Dr. Thorne was not a legitimate practicing psychiatrist. He was a highly corrupt physician infamous in elite legal circles. Thorne operated a lucrative underground business providing fabricated medical diagnoses to wealthy families. He specialized in creating airtight legal cover for impatient heirs looking to seize control of family trusts. Mitchell explained that Thorne charged exorbitant fees to declare elderly parents mentally incompetent without ever conducting a single clinical evaluation. Samira had purchased a premium package of medical perjury. Her arrogance in selecting a known fraudster gave us our first major tactical advantage. Mitchell tapped his expensive pen against the mahogany surface. He stated that tearing apart Thorne in a federal courtroom would be remarkably easy. The man had a digital trail of highly suspicious diagnostic patterns. Samira had unknowingly handed us a loaded weapon. I nodded slowly. The fraudulent diagnosis was no longer a cage to lock me away. It was the exact key we would use to lock them in a federal penitentiary. Mitchell picked up his cellular phone. A loud emergency alert blared from the device. He turned the screen toward me. The local police department had just issued an official silver alert across the entire metropolitan area. My face and physical description were currently flashing on highway billboards and television screens. Samira had filed a missing persons report claiming a severely disoriented senior citizen had wandered away from his home. I was legally classified as an endangered and incapacitated adult. Any police officer who spotted me had the legal authority to detain me and return me directly to the medical transport van. We needed a secure base of operations immediately. Mitchell opened his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy set of brass keys. He tossed them across the desk. I caught them in my left hand. He informed me the keys belonged to an unlisted corporate apartment on the edge of the financial district. The firm maintained the property under a shell company for visiting foreign executives. There was no lease attached to my name. There was no digital footprint connecting me to the address. It was a perfect invisible fortress. I pocketed the keys. We immediately pivoted to formulating a counterattack strategy. We needed to file a federal wire fraud injunction to freeze Samira's retail holding accounts before she could spend the stolen $2 million. Mitchell outlined the grim reality of our situation. Filing the injunction and initiating a massive federal lawsuit required an immediate retainer of at least $50,000. We hit a massive operational roadblock. Every single domestic bank account tied to my Social Security number was currently frozen by the temporary conservatorship order. If I attempted to wire funds from any local branch, Samira and the police would be notified in seconds. I could not use a credit card. I could not write a check. I possessed exactly $50 in cash. Mitchell looked at me with a grim expression. He asked how I planned to fund a federal war without alerting the enemy. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city skyline. I told him a concrete man always builds a secondary foundation. I explained that I had anticipated the possibility of total domestic financial ruin decades ago. I did not trust the local banking systems to protect my family in the event of a catastrophic economic collapse. I possessed resources they could not freeze and accounts they could not monitor. I told Mitchell to prepare the federal paperwork. I would secure the capital by nightfall. The old bulldog was backed into a corner, but my teeth were razor sharp. The unlisted corporate apartment sits on the 42nd floor, a sterile box of glass and white leather. It is completely isolated from the chaos unfolding on the streets below. I sit at the glass dining table with my laptop illuminated in the dark. Mitchell works with a speed that justifies his exorbitant fees. By midnight, his team of private investigators bypasses the heavy digital firewalls of Samira's luxury retail business. The encrypted files drop directly into my secure inbox. I spend the early hours of the morning dissecting the anatomy of my daughter-in-law's failure. The public facade of her boutique is immaculate. She operates a multi-level showroom in the most expensive commercial district in the city. Her social media profiles display a relentless parade of imported Italian silk crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes clinking with minor celebrities. She projects the flawless image of a self-made retail tycoon. The financial reality buried in the leaked ledgers is a catastrophic black hole. The numbers do not merely indicate a struggling business. They reveal total systemic collapse. Her profit margins are entirely fictional. She has been bleeding operating cash for 3 consecutive years. The inventory turnover is non-existent. Her seasonal collections rot in expensive warehouses while she continues to order fresh stock to maintain the illusion of high demand. I cross-reference her accounts payable ledger. 3 major European suppliers have placed her on a strict credit hold. Her primary logistics contractor has issued a final warning before initiating a lawsuit for unpaid transport fees. The boutique is a hollow shell held together by expensive marketing and pure arrogance. The deeper I dig into the spreadsheets, the more the pieces of her ambush make sense. Samira did not come after my trust fund out of simple greed. She came after my life's work because she was drowning in an ocean of her own incompetence. Her empire was built on quicksand, and she needed solid concrete to stop the structure from collapsing. She chose my concrete. I study the digital rows of red ink with cold detachment. I trace a specific string of massive late fees applied to her commercial lease. Her landlord was preparing to lock the doors and seize the property. She was exactly 1 week away from public bankruptcy and total social ruin. Her glittering world was scheduled to detonate. The true horror of the situation crystallizes as I follow the exact path of the forged $2 million equity line. Samira did not execute the loan to expand her operations. She funneled the stolen capital directly into the boutique's primary holding accounts to prevent an immediate public collapse. I traced the wire transfer from the First National Bank directly into her corporate ledger. The money hit her account last Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, she had already burned through $700,000 just to pacify her most aggressive creditors. She wired panicked payments to overseas suppliers to release her captive inventory. She paid the back rent to halt the commercial eviction. The stolen capital acted as a desperate tourniquet on a severed artery. But the most devastating detail rests entirely on my son's shoulders. Evan is a highly educated corporate litigator. He spends his days analyzing complex mergers and shielding multinational corporations from liability. Yet he is entirely oblivious to the financial apocalypse occurring inside his own marriage. He is blinded by Samira's curated perfection and relentless manipulation. By forging his right-handed signature on the trust documents, Samira did not simply steal from me. She legally bound my son to the theft. Evan is now the primary legal guarantor of a fraudulent $2 million federal loan. If the boutique finally collapses, the creditors and the bank will not stop at Samira. They will instantly target Evan. They will seize his personal assets, garnish his future earnings, and shred his impeccable legal reputation. His career will be obliterated by his direct association with massive wire fraud. He stood in my living room and defended his wife, entirely ignorant of the fact that she had strapped a financial bomb to his chest. He signed the conservatorship papers to lock me in a psychiatric ward, believing he was the responsible adult taking charge. In reality, he is the ultimate victim of his wife's deception. I stare at the forged signature on the digital screen. I feel absolutely no pity for my son. A man who refuses to inspect his own foundation deserves to watch his house collapse. He chose to enable a predator, and the predator turned him into collateral damage. Samira leveraged his blind trust to secure her own survival, destroying his future to buy herself a few weeks of breathing room. I opened the final folder provided by Mitchell's investigators. It contains internal corporate emails and heavily guarded marketing schedules. Samira is not using the stolen $2 million to quietly restructure her debts and stabilize the sinking ship. Instead, she is doubling down on her delusion. She is frantically rushing the launch of a massive grand opening event for a brand new flagship showroom. The internal memos reveal an aggressive push to secure fresh, wealthy investors. She intends to dazzle the city's elite with an extravagant gala projecting an image of unstoppable expansion to lure in new capital. She believes new investor money will allow her to secretly pay back the forged bank loan before Evan ever discovers the truth. But the math does not align with her ambition. The event production costs, the celebrity appearances, and the rush-ordered luxury inventory have already consumed the remainder of my stolen equity. The $2 million is gone, and the boutique is still facing a massive operational deficit. The puzzle pieces of the fake medical diagnosis finally lock into place. She requires my complete financial destruction to finish her project. She needs my commercial property fully liquidated before the end of the month to cover the remaining deficit of her flagship launch. That is exactly why she filed the emergency conservatorship order with such terrifying speed. She needs absolute legal authority to sell my Southside commercial complex to private developers immediately. Her timeline is frantic. She is racing against the clock of her own impending ruin. The grand opening is scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from today. If she does not secure the capital from my liquidated assets before the doors open, her checks will bounce. The vendors will halt the event and her fraud will be exposed to the entire city. Desperation makes a person arrogant, and arrogance breeds fatal mistakes. She believes she has neutralized me by issuing a silver alert and driving me into hiding. She assumes I am a confused old man running out of time. She does not realize her frantic schedule is our primary weapon. We know exactly what she needs exactly when she needs it and exactly how she plans to steal it. I close the laptop screen and watch the early morning sunlight reflect off the glass table. I stand up and prepare to leave the safe house. I leave the corporate safe house through the underground parking garage to avoid the lobby security cameras. The unlisted apartment provides excellent physical shelter, but it lacks the untraceable digital network I require for this specific operation. I walk 3 blocks to a discount apparel store and purchase a heavy canvas winter coat and a dark wool watch cap using the emergency cash from my pocket. I pull the cap low over my forehead and turn the collar up. The silver alert makes my face a severe liability. Every patrol car is currently looking for an elderly, disoriented man in a light jacket. I catch a regional bus heading north, riding for 90 tense minutes until I cross the county line into a quiet, working-class suburb. The municipal public library sits at the far end of a muted commercial strip. It is a decaying brick building from the late 70s. It is exactly the kind of underfunded civic infrastructure I need to disappear digitally. I walk through the automatic sliding glass doors. I keep my head angled downward, avoiding the single security camera mounted above the circulation desk. I approach the young reference librarian and request a guest pass for the public computer terminals. I do not offer identification. I hand her a crumpled $5 bill as a generous donation to secure a 60-minute session without registering a library card. She hands me a printed slip of paper with a randomly generated alphanumeric login code. I walk to the furthest terminal in the back corner of the room. I am perfectly shielded by towering dusty shelves of physical reference encyclopedias. I sit down and type the code. The screen flickers to life. I do not open a standard web browser. I reach into my pocket and retrieve a tiny encrypted flash drive. I plug it into the terminal. I execute a command sequence to launch a portable secure routing network. The screen goes black before loading a stark text-based interface. I am bypassing the domestic servers completely. Samira and Evan have frozen my legal identity within the United States. They believe they have trapped me in a total financial blackout. They do not understand that a man who spends his life pouring concrete always knows how to build a secondary exit. I type the IP address of a private server located in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. The connection takes 30 agonizing seconds to authenticate. The cursor blinks steadily against the dark background. A password prompt finally appears. I enter a 32-character alphanumeric passphrase. The system grants me immediate access to an offshore holding entity registered under an anonymous corporate proxy. The screen displays an available balance of exactly $812,000 in liquid cash. I stare at the digital numbers glowing on the monitor. They represent my ultimate insurance policy against betrayal. In the autumn of 2008, the global financial market collapsed. My commercial concrete business nearly disintegrated overnight. Domestic banks froze all commercial lending, massive metropolitan developers defaulted on their contracts, and I was left staring at a company ledger bleeding red ink. I spent 6 grueling months fighting off bankruptcy. I liquidated my personal savings and sold my own vehicles just to keep my crew employed and my cement trucks running. The stress nearly broke my heart. I swore to myself I would never again allow my family's basic survival to depend entirely on the fragile whims of American financial institutions. Once the economy stabilized and the Southside Commercial Property Trust began yielding heavy, consistent dividends, I quietly diverted a fraction of the profits. I funneled the capital through a series of legal offshore corporate entities until it rested safely outside the jurisdiction of any local court or greedy relative. Gwen knew about the account. Evan did not. Samira certainly did not. They scoured my domestic portfolios and believed they had seized my entire financial war chest. They were wrong. I opened the secure wire transfer protocol. I pull a torn scrap of paper from my coat pocket containing the routing digits for Mitchell's untraceable legal retainer account. I do not transfer the $50,000 required for the initial federal injunction. I initiate a wire transfer for $250,000. Mitchell will need overwhelming capital to file the injunction, hire forensic accountants, and bribe the necessary clerks to expedite the federal arrest warrants. He needs a war chest to match his ruthless tactics. I authorize the transaction. The screen flashes a solid green confirmation banner. The capital is successfully deployed. The financial freeze is broken. I have successfully armed my attorney with lethal ammunition. I close the connection and wipe the terminal's cache entirely clean. I pull the flash drive from the port and stand up from the desk. I walk out of the library and step back into the freezing afternoon air. I pull a cheap prepaid cellular phone from the deep pocket of my canvas coat. I purchased the burner device with cash at a convenience store 2 hours ago. I power the device on and wait for it to acquire a signal. I had memorized Evan's private mobile number a decade ago. I type a brief, deliberately vague text message stating I am safe and simply need time to clear my head. I hit send. It is a tactical probe designed to test his immediate psychological reaction. I do not have to wait long. Less than 2 minutes later, the small screen lights up with an incoming message from my son. I open the text. Evan begs me to come home immediately for my own physical safety. He writes that he is worried sick about my sudden confusion and disorientation. He insists I am experiencing a severe medical episode and that Samira has top-tier doctors waiting at the house to help me recover. He promises that everything will be fine if I just reply with my exact location so he can drive over and pick me up. I read the words 3 times. There is no mention of the $2 million commercial loan. There is no inquiry about the missing trust funds or the forged documents. There is only a calculated, desperate attempt to lure me back into their physical trap. I realize with absolute chilling certainty that my son is not a passive, ignorant victim in the capture effort. He is fully complicit in the hunt. He is actively participating in the operation to lock me inside a psychiatric ward to protect his wife's massive fraud and shield his own legal reputation. He is weaponizing his role as a concerned son to orchestrate my permanent imprisonment. The last remaining fiber of paternal hope snaps cleanly in two. I do not feel anger or sorrow. I feel a profound, hollow clarity. I walk to the edge of the street where a heavy iron storm drain sits deeply embedded in the concrete gutter. I pry the plastic back off the burner phone. I snap the internal SIM card in half with my thumb. I drop the plastic pieces and the battery directly through the metal grate. I listen to the components splash into the dark, freezing water rushing below the street. The emotional tie to my only child is permanently severed. I turn my back on the storm drain and walk toward the regional bus stop. I return to the silent corporate apartment as the city streetlights flicker to life. The glass box on the 42nd floor feels colder now. I do not turn on the overhead lights. I stand by the window and watch the traffic pulse below until the heavy deadbolt clicks open. Mitchell walks into the safe house carrying 2 thick leather briefcases. He drops them onto the glass dining table with a heavy thud. He removes his suit jacket and rolls up his sleeves. We do not exchange greetings. We are past the point of social pleasantries. Mitchell opens the first briefcase and extracts a massive stack of legal files bound by heavy brass clips. These are not digital summaries or scanned copies. They are the original certified documents establishing the Southside Commercial Property Trust. Gwen and I signed these exact pages 2 decades ago. Mitchell spreads the paperwork across the glass surface. He maps out the legal boundaries of Samira's perceived power. When Gwen passed away, the primary trustee status automatically shifted to Evan. Evan immediately granted Samira full operational proxy. Samira operates under the absolute conviction that this proxy grants her irrevocable, unchecked authority over the capital. She believes the trust operates as a one-way street, funneling the concrete sweat of my past directly into the silk-lined pockets of her present. She is operating with the dangerous arrogance of a person who has never actually read the fine print. Mitchell points to the primary operational bylaws. The text grants the active trustee the right to manage leases, execute basic maintenance contracts, and collect rental yields. Samira read these initial pages and stopped. She assumed the legal framework of my entire life was constructed as simply as a basic checking account. She viewed the legal boundaries as mere suggestions. She believed she held the absolute key to the kingdom. Mitchell taps a silver pen against the glass table. He states that any standard litigator would look at the primary bylaws and conclude Samira had the legal right to secure a line of credit. The bank manager certainly believed she possessed that absolute legal right. Thomas at First National Bank approved the $2 million extraction based entirely on this initial section of the trust. Samira thought she had successfully bypassed the heavy main vault door. She did not realize that I had personally designed the hidden complex locking mechanism. I reach into the massive stack of paperwork and extract a single sealed envelope. I slide the document across the glass table toward Mitchell. I point to a deeply buried legal addendum printed on the second page. I insisted upon this specific structural fortification exactly 5 years ago. Gwen was gone and Evan was preparing to marry Samira. I recognized the raw, unbridled ambition radiating from her eyes during their engagement dinner. A man who pours concrete learns to anticipate the exact locations where a foundation might eventually crack under extreme external pressure. I paid an independent estate lawyer to construct an ironclad reversion clause. The clause acts as a hidden tripwire wired directly to the core of the financial trust. The language is utterly uncompromising. If any acting trustee attempts to execute a commercial loan or line of credit exceeding $50,000 without dual in-person notarization, the trust immediately triggers a total structural collapse. The legal entity automatically dissolves without the requirement of a formal court hearing. Every single asset, commercial lease, and capital reserve instantly reverts to my absolute sole ownership. Mitchell reads the dense legal text twice. A sharp whistle escapes his lips. He looks up at me with profound professional respect. He states that the clause is beautifully ruthless. Samira did not bother to search the archives for obscure amendments. She only read the pages that handed her the keys. By forging my son's signature on the $2 million bank loan, she did not just commit a massive federal crime. She inadvertently activated the exact mechanism designed to strip her of all power. The reversion trap was sprung the very second her ink touched the fraudulent document. The commercial properties no longer belong to the trust. They belong entirely to me. Samira is currently operating a bankrupt luxury boutique using stolen capital backed by an invalid mortgage. She is standing on a trapdoor, and she does not even realize the floorboards have already vanished beneath her expensive designer shoes. Mitchell begins organizing the paperwork into categorized combat folders. He tells me we have the absolute power to crush her today. We can walk into the federal courthouse, freeze the retail accounts, and have her arrested before sunset. I shake my head slowly. I look at the forged signature on the bank document. I tell Mitchell we are not going to stop her yet. Mitchell slowly leans back in his heavy leather chair and steeples his fingers. He analyzes my refusal to launch an immediate legal strike. He asks me to articulate my exact strategic objective. I tell him that simply arresting Samira for bank fraud is inadequate. A sharp defense attorney could potentially argue she was acting under immense stress or shift the blame entirely onto my son. I refuse to allow Evan to become the scapegoat for her catastrophic greed. I need her criminal actions to be so overwhelmingly documented and publicly destructive that no jury could ever offer her a shred of leniency. I want her to actively build the exact and inescapable dimensions of her own federal prison cell. Mitchell smiles a genuinely cold and deeply calculating smile. He entirely agrees with my tactical assessment of the battlefield. He pulls up a digital map of her financial network on his tablet. He points out that the $2 million is currently sitting stagnant in a domestic holding account. The moment she attempts to utilize that capital to purchase luxury inventory from her international suppliers, she escalates the situation. Moving fraudulent funds across state or international borders instantly triggers federal wire fraud statutes. The criminal penalties multiply exponentially with every single transaction she executes. Mitchell advises me to remain perfectly still and wait. We must allow her the unchecked freedom to hang herself. We will monitor the bank account silently from the corporate safe house. We will watch her transfer the stolen equity to secure the massive shipments of silk and diamonds for her frantic grand opening event. She believes she is racing toward her ultimate financial salvation. She is completely blind to the fact that every check she writes is another iron bar sliding firmly into place. The tension in the room shifts from defensive survival to predatory anticipation. I pour myself a glass of cold water from the heavy crystal pitcher resting on the glass table. The waiting game is always the most psychologically demanding phase of a concrete pour. You must allow the foundation to cure completely before applying structural weight. If you rush the process, the entire building will inevitably crack. I am prepared to wait in the absolute dark. I am prepared to let Samira experience the intoxicating high of a false victory. We will strike precisely when she believes she is truly invincible and absolutely untouchable. Mitchell did not build his reputation by waiting idly for his enemies to make mistakes. While we allowed Samira to continue her frantic spending spree across international borders, his investigative team launched a surgical strike into the human infrastructure of her boutique. Every corrupt enterprise possesses a structural vulnerability. Mitchell found hers sitting at a cramped desk in the windowless basement of her commercial showroom. His name was Neil. He was Samira's lead financial controller, a man burdened with the impossible task of managing her catastrophic ledgers. Mitchell projected Neil's digital dossier onto the glass dining table in our safe house. The profile was a masterpiece of corporate misery. Neil was severely underpaid, chronically overworked, and thoroughly disgruntled. He had spent the last 3 years watching his employer siphon operating capital to fund a lavish personal lifestyle while repeatedly denying him basic salary increases. Mitchell discovered that Neil had recently been denied a promised annual bonus just days before Samira initiated her $2 million grand opening push. A disgruntled employee is a liability. A deeply resentful accountant holding the keys to a fraudulent empire is a loaded weapon. Mitchell explained that Neil possessed absolute knowledge of the forged bank loan. He was the man tasked with artificially balancing the books to hide the massive deficit from potential new investors. Neil knew exactly where every stolen dollar originated and precisely where it was going. However, his digital footprint revealed a man operating in a state of sheer terror. He was actively searching for secondary employment and quietly consulting whistleblower protection laws late at night. He realized he was legally chained to a sinking ship and desperately wanted a life raft. I stared at the grainy surveillance photograph of Neil leaving the boutique. He looked exhausted, carrying a heavy leather briefcase with slumped shoulders. Samira treated her employees with the same arrogant disdain she reserved for her family. She assumed Neil was too timid and dependent on his meager salary to ever challenge her authority. She failed to understand that extreme desperation eradicates loyalty. I told Mitchell we needed the original unedited financial ledgers to prove Samira was actively laundering the stolen equity, not merely mismanaging it. I instructed him to prepare the necessary capital. I would personally handle the extraction of our new asset. The neon sign of the 24-hour diner flickered with a persistent mechanical buzz. It was a decaying establishment located 3 blocks from Neil's modest apartment complex, a place that smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee. Mitchell's surveillance team confirmed this was Neil's mandatory stop every Tuesday night after working a 14-hour shift attempting to balance Samira's fraudulent books. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth in the darkest corner of the restaurant. I wore my heavy canvas coat and kept my face angled away from the greasy windows. Neil walked through the front door exactly at midnight. He ordered a black coffee and slid into a booth 2 tables away, immediately opening his laptop with a heavy sigh. He looked like a man preparing for his own execution. I waited until the lone waitress retreated to the kitchen. I stood up, walked silently across the sticky linoleum floor, and slid into the booth directly across from him. Neil jumped, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He opened his mouth to protest the intrusion. I did not give him the opportunity to speak. I addressed him by his full legal name and stated my own. The color drained from his face instantly. He recognized me from the photographs on Samira's desk and the frantic silver alert bulletins flashing across the local news. He knew exactly who I was and whose money he was currently helping to steal. He began to stammer a pathetic denial, preparing to recite the corporate lies Samira had instructed him to memorize. I raised my hand and stopped him. I placed a thick, unmarked manila envelope onto the center of the scratched Formica table. I slid it slowly across the surface until it touched his laptop. I told him the envelope contained $20,000 in untraceable, non-sequential bills. I explained that it was not a bribe. It was a severance package. I outlined the exact reality of his situation with cold, mathematical precision. I informed him that my attorneys possessed absolute proof of the forged $2 million loan. I told him the federal authorities would inevitably raid the boutique within days. When the FBI auditors dismantled the accounts, they would find Neil's digital signature on every fraudulent transfer. Samira would undoubtedly sacrifice him to save herself. I offered him a single fleeting window to step off the tracks before the train annihilated his future. Neil stared at the thick envelope. His hands shook violently, rattling the cheap ceramic coffee cup on the table. He was a man suspended over a terrifying abyss, realizing the bridge he had been walking on was constructed entirely of rotting wood. He looked around the empty diner, his eyes wide with a frantic, hunted energy. He knew I was not exaggerating the threat. He had spent months watching Samira execute increasingly reckless financial maneuvers, terrified of the day the numbers would finally crash down upon them. He reached out and touched the edge of the envelope. He asked me what exactly I required in exchange for his absolute immunity. I demanded the true unredacted financial ledgers. I needed the shadow book Samira kept hidden from her investors, the exact documents proving her deliberate criminal intent. Neil swallowed hard, his breathing shallow and rapid. He unzipped a hidden compartment in his battered leather briefcase. He extracted a small encrypted black flash drive. He placed it onto the Formica table next to the cash. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. He explained that the drive contained far more than just the evidence of a mismanaged commercial loan. He revealed the catastrophic depth of Samira's deception. She was not simply burning the $2 million to pacify aggressive vendors and fund her extravagant grand opening. She was intentionally routing the stolen trust capital through a complex web of offshore shell companies. She was creating fake vendor invoices, paying non-existent international suppliers, and washing the money to make it appear as legitimate foreign investment revenue. It was a highly calculated, aggressive money laundering operation designed to completely obscure the origin of the funds and deceive federal tax auditors. She was attempting to permanently legitimize her theft by mixing my concrete money with her phantom retail profits. Neil grabbed the envelope and shoved it deep into his briefcase. He stood up, abandoning his coffee and his laptop charger entirely. He told me to destroy her before she destroyed everyone connected to her. He walked out of the diner and vanished into the freezing night, leaving the city behind him forever. I picked up the black flash drive and slipped it into my coat pocket. The final nail in Samira's coffin had been secured. The forged loan was merely the bait that triggered the reversion clause. The money laundering evidence elevated her actions from standard financial fraud to a massive federal syndicate crime. Her prison sentence was no longer a possibility. It was an absolute, inescapable certainty. I stepped out into the biting wind, carrying the exact instrument of her destruction back to the safe house. I returned to the secure glass-walled apartment and placed the black flash drive directly onto the dining table. Mitchell plugged the device into his isolated network and began extracting the shadow ledgers. The data was a devastating gold mine. We had the irrefutable proof of her offshore money laundering. Now we needed her to commit those stolen funds completely and publicly. I asked Mitchell for a sheet of plain white stationery and a heavy fountain pen. I sat at the table to compose a message to my son. I needed to convince Samira she had unequivocally won so she would continue her extravagant grand opening without looking over her shoulder. I did not use my standard architectural block lettering. I deliberately loosened my grip on the barrel of the pen. I let my hand shake and drag against the paper, replicating the physical deterioration they claimed I suffered from. I crafted a careful narrative of a defeated and severely disoriented old man. I wrote that the city was too loud, the streets were too confusing, and I was incredibly tired. I stated that I could no longer manage the crushing weight of my own thoughts, and that I was finally ready to surrender. I explicitly promised to sign the commercial property over to the trust permanently and enter Dr. Thorne's memory care facility without a fight. I added a single desperate condition. I begged them to simply leave me alone in peace for 3 days to gather my final memories before I surrendered my freedom. I folded the paper and sealed it in a blank envelope. This was the psychological bait. We needed Samira to believe the hunted bulldog had finally curled up in a corner to die. If she thought I was permanently neutralized, she would stop searching the alleys and focus entirely on her vanity project. Mitchell did not use a standard commercial courier to deliver the bait. He dispatched one of his private investigators to slip the envelope directly under the front door of Evan's suburban townhouse just before dawn. We monitored the immediate fallout from the safe house. Mitchell had previously secured full access to Samira's digital communication channels through the administrative portal Neil had provided. We watched the intercepted text messages populate on the glowing monitor. Evan found the letter first. He sent a frantic message to his wife containing a photograph of my trembling handwriting. He expressed profound relief that his father was finally seeing reason and accepting medical help. Samira's response was swift and entirely devoid of human empathy. She mocked my written surrender. She texted Evan that the stubborn old man had finally realized he was completely powerless against her legal maneuvers. She interpreted my plea for 3 days of quiet isolation as a pathetic, senile capitulation. She assumed the aggressive silver alert and the looming threat of police capture had successfully broken my spirit. She immediately told Evan to call the precinct and cancel the active missing persons search to avoid any unnecessary public drama right before her boutique launch. She wanted a quiet, seamless transition of my concrete assets into her bank accounts. She truly believed she had orchestrated the perfect crime. She had successfully sidelined her husband, neutralized her father-in-law, and secured her financial lifeline. Her supreme arrogance blinded her to the sheer tactical impossibility of a man like me simply giving up without a brutal fight. She read a letter written by a predator and firmly believed it was penned by prey. She instructed Evan to prepare the final property transfer documents for Friday morning. She told him they would collect me, force my signature, and lock me in the psychiatric ward before the weekend began. We watched her digital gloating with absolute silence. She was swallowing the hook deeply into her throat. The psychological victory acted like a highly volatile accelerant on her already frantic timeline. Confident that her $2 million safety net was entirely secure and my permanent silence was guaranteed, Samira initiated the final phase of her grand opening. Through the intercepted emails, we watched her violently escalate her spending. She was no longer just paying off immediate commercial debts or pacifying angry landlords. She was aggressively tying the fraudulent capital into massive, highly public assets. She digitally signed a binding contract with an elite European catering syndicate for $250,000. She wired non-refundable deposits to a celebrity public relations firm to secure high-profile guests for her red carpet. She authorized the immediate release of shipping containers filled with imported designer garments, using the stolen trust funds to clear international customs. Every single signature she appended to a vendor agreement tightened the snare around her own neck. Mitchell leaned over his tablet and tracked the outbound wire transfers as they hit international banking nodes in real time. She was converting liquid stolen cash into untraceable offshore assets and highly visible domestic liabilities. By noon, she had committed the absolute entirety of the stolen equity. She had officially moved the money across state and international lines, graduating from localized bank fraud to a massive federal money laundering operation. There was no remaining capital to return even if she suddenly wanted to. She had successfully built the exact dimensions of her own federal prison cell. She needed the upcoming sale of my commercial property to cover the catastrophic financial gap she had just widened. She believed Friday morning would bring her the final deed to my life's work. She did not know Friday morning would bring absolute devastation. The trap was now permanently locked. The concrete was poured and rapidly setting around her ankles. We simply had to wait for it to harden completely. The digital feed from the security cameras I installed years ago flickers to life on Mitchell's encrypted tablet. The safe house is completely silent except for the low hum of the ceiling ventilation system. We sit shoulder to shoulder and watch a man in a cheap beige windbreaker walk up the stone pathway to my front door. He carries a thick clipboard and a heavy roll of industrial tape. He is a court-appointed process server executing a municipal directive. He slaps a bright yellow sheet of paper against the solid oak wood of my front entrance and presses the tape down firmly. It is a formal notice of eviction and property seizure. Samira did not simply stop at plundering the commercial trust. Her financial deficit is a starving beast that demands constant feeding. The offshore money laundering operation and the catastrophic upfront costs of her upcoming grand opening event have entirely consumed the $2 million bank loan. She requires an immediate and massive injection of liquid cash to survive the week. She has made the calculated decision to liquidate my personal residence. The house sits on a double lot in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. It is prime real estate for luxury townhome developers. She used her fraudulently obtained medical conservatorship to completely bypass standard probate laws and list the property directly with a predatory private firm. She is desperately attempting to finalize a cash sale before the end of the month. She needs the money deposited and cleared before Evan ever realizes the terrifying depth of the ocean they are currently drowning in. She assumes I am wandering the streets or hiding in terrified isolation, entirely incapable of fighting a municipal court order or hiring legal counsel. She views my home of 40 years as nothing more than a convenient ATM to cover her fraudulent tracks. Mitchell zooms in on the digital feed. The yellow paper flutters aggressively in the afternoon wind. It is the final insult. She intends to erase my physical history and sell the very roof over my head to fund her vanity project. I do not feel anger when I look at the high-definition screen. Anger is a hot emotion that burns out quickly and leads to tactical errors. I feel a glacial, absolute resolve. The trap we set with the reversion clause will crush her commercial ambitions, but I need to watch her fail in person. I need to witness the exact moment her arrogance shatters into dust. 24 hours later, I sit silently in the driver's seat of an unmarked rental sedan parked discreetly at the end of my own street. The engine is off to avoid drawing attention. The windows are heavily tinted. A sleek black luxury SUV glides up to the curb and parks illegally directly in front of my house. Samira steps out onto the pavement. She wears a tailored white designer suit and oversized dark sunglasses. She moves with the brisk, commanding entitlement of a conquering monarch claiming a newly captured territory. Two men in sharp business suits follow closely behind her. They are the private developers holding digital tablets and assessing the property lines with hungry, calculating eyes. Samira unlocks the front door using a duplicate key she undoubtedly had cut specifically for this invasion. She leaves the door wide open as she ushers the men inside the foyer. I pick up a pair of high-powered binoculars from the passenger seat. I adjust the focus dial. I can see straight into the living room through the large bay windows. Samira is hosting a private walkthrough of the home I built with my own two hands. She gestures broadly toward the load-bearing structural walls, pantomiming how easily they can be demolished to maximize the lot space. She walks into the formal dining room and points a manicured finger at the vintage hand-carved mahogany table Gwen and I purchased on our 10th anniversary. I watch her dismiss the solid wood furniture with a flippant wave of her hand, clearly instructing the developers that the interior contents are worthless junk to be hauled away to a municipal landfill. She treats a lifetime of carefully curated memories as a minor inconvenience holding up her demolition schedule. She glides from room to room, pointing out the original hardwood floors and the custom crown molding as outdated trash standing in the way of progress. Her entire demeanor radiates absolute toxic supremacy. She is already spending the cash from the demolition sale in her mind. She is planning her grand opening outfit while standing in the center of my murdered wife's favorite room. Her blatant disrespect for the foundation of my family solidifies my strategy. She is a parasite feeding on my past to finance her fraudulent future. I lower the binoculars slightly and shift my focus to the front porch. My son is standing perfectly still beside the heavy oak door. Evan did not follow his wife inside to participate in the desecration of his childhood home. He remains outside on the cold stone steps. He wears a casual gray sweater and slacks his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looks entirely miserable and physically diminished. He stares down at the wooden planks of the porch, refusing to make eye contact with the developers as they pass by the windows. He knows exactly what is happening behind that door. He knows this house contains every cherished memory of his mother. He knows this rapid liquidation is a profound violation of everything our family built and stood for. Yet he remains completely silent. He does not step inside to stop Samira from treating our history like disposable garbage. He does not raise his voice to defend my legacy or demand an explanation for her frantic rush to sell. He stands there in the damp afternoon air, an absolute coward enabling a ruthless predator. He has consciously chosen his wife's fraudulent ambition over his own blood. He is willing to let her sell the ground he learned to walk on just to keep the fragile fabricated peace in his toxic marriage. Watching him stand there staring passively at his own expensive shoes eradicates the very last ounce of mercy in my heart. A father always wants to believe his son possesses a hidden reserve of honor, a breaking point where he will finally stand up and fight. I stare through the tinted glass of the rental car and accept the final brutal truth. Evan is an empty vessel. He is a man without a spine, perfectly content to let me be destroyed, so he does not have to face the terrifying reality of his own choices. I place the binoculars back onto the passenger seat. I turn the ignition key, and the engine hums quietly to life. I pull away from the curb and drive slowly past my own house. I do not look back. The concrete has fully cured. The demolition is scheduled. I feel absolutely no remorse for the absolute devastation I am about to unleash upon them both. I parked the rental sedan in the underground garage of the corporate safe house and rode the freight elevator back up to the 42nd floor. The sterile environment of the glass apartment offered a stark contrast to the emotional decay I had just witnessed on my front porch. I did not have time to dwell on my son's cowardice. Mitchell was already waiting for me at the long dining table. He was not alone. A slender man with wire-rimmed glasses and a meticulously pressed gray suit stood beside him. Mitchell introduced the man as Arthur Vance. Vance was not a standard corporate attorney. He was an independent forensic document examiner. He had spent 30 years working as an expert witness for federal prosecutors specializing in dismantling high-level financial forgery. Vance brought a heavy metallic case containing portable digital microscopes, illuminated magnifiers, and specialized light boards. He arranged his equipment across the glass surface with the precise, practiced movements of a surgeon preparing an operating theater. Mitchell had successfully subpoenaed the high-resolution digital scans of the original $2 million loan agreement directly from First National Bank. The documents were queued up on the large monitor. We needed an unassailable baseline to prove the signature on the bottom line was a complete fabrication. I reached into my canvas duffel bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. While packing my essential belongings before escaping my house, I had grabbed a folder containing my personal family archives. I extracted 3 specific documents. The first was a handwritten birthday card Evan had given me 5 years ago. The second was a personal tax form he had filled out by hand during his first year of law school. The third was a drafted legal memo he had signed in my presence. I laid the documents flat on the illuminated board. I told Vance the most crucial detail of the entire operation. My son is severely left-handed. He has been strictly dominant with his left hand since he first learned to hold a pencil. Samira is fiercely right-handed. I watched Vance adjust his lenses and lean over the illuminated table. The tactical dissection of my daughter-in-law's arrogance had officially commenced. Vance worked in absolute silence for 2 uninterrupted hours. He utilized a digital stylus to map the microscopic ink patterns on the screen, comparing the scanned bank loan against the physical samples of Evan's authentic writing. He did not look for simple visual similarities. He looked for the hidden biomechanics of the human hand. When he finally stepped back from the monitor, his expression was completely devoid of doubt. He stated with absolute mathematical certainty that the signature on the loan agreement was a massive, indisputable forgery. Vance pointed to the enlarged projection of the fraudulent signature on the screen. He explained that a left-handed individual pushes the pen across the paper, creating specific friction points and distinct pools of ink on the upward strokes. A right-handed person pulls the pen, resulting in an entirely different pressure gradient. He isolated the sharp loop of the letter E in Evan's name. The authentic samples showed a smooth, continuous rhythm born from decades of muscle memory. The signature on the bank document was jagged under microscopic review. It contained tiny, almost invisible micro-hesitations. Vance explained this was the universal tremor of fraud. It was the physical hesitation of a right-handed writer attempting to forcefully mirror a left-handed slant. Samira had not merely traced his name through a lightbox. She had confidently free-handed the signature, operating under the arrogant assumption that a bank manager would never question a glamorous wife presenting documents on behalf of her wealthy husband. She believed her social status provided an impenetrable shield against basic scrutiny. She was entirely wrong. Her aggressive right-handed strokes were vividly exposed under the ultraviolet scan. The angle of the letters completely mismatched Evan's natural writing mechanics. Vance pulled a heavy piece of official letterhead from his briefcase. He drafted a comprehensive sworn affidavit detailing his forensic methodology and his final irrefutable conclusion. He signed his name at the bottom and stamped the paper with his certified legal seal. The document was a lethal weapon. It legally absolved my son of the catastrophic debt, but more importantly, it officially classified Samira's action as a multi-million-dollar federal crime. The proof was no longer circumstantial or based on my personal suspicion. It was anchored in cold, indisputable science. Mitchell took the sworn affidavit from Vance and thanked him for his rapid deployment. Once the forensic expert packed his equipment and left the safe house, Mitchell turned his attention to the empty cardboard banker's box resting on the floor. It was time to construct the final instrument of Samira's destruction. Mitchell moved around the glass table, gathering the raw materials of our silent war. He operated a heavy industrial three-hole punch, the sharp mechanical snap echoing loudly in the quiet apartment. He began assembling a massive single federal dossier. He divided the heavy binder into three distinct, devastating sections. The first section contained the fraudulent medical conservatorship. Mitchell inserted the pristine copy of the affidavit signed by Dr. Eris Thorne, pairing it with the digital trail of Thorne's previous corruption. This established Samira's initial intent to unlawfully seize my physical freedom and bypass probate court. The second section formed the core of the financial betrayal. Mitchell filed the high-resolution scans of the forged bank loan directly next to Arthur Vance's sworn forensic analysis. This proved the $2 million was acquired through direct aggressive criminal fraud. The final section was the killing blow. Mitchell inserted the black flash drive containing the shadow ledgers extracted from the disgruntled accountant. He printed the most damning spreadsheets and highlighted the exact routes where Samira funneled the stolen trust equity through offshore shell companies to pay for her imported boutique inventory. This elevated the entire operation from localized theft to international money laundering. Mitchell snapped the heavy metal rings of the binder shut. He placed his hands flat on the cover. He explained his deployment strategy with absolute clarity. We were not going to walk this box into a municipal police station. Local detectives lacked the jurisdiction and the resources to dismantle a financial syndicate of this magnitude. Mitchell possessed a direct contact within the federal prosecutor's office, a senior agent specializing in white-collar syndicates and wire fraud. He stated that handing this specific dossier to a federal prosecutor was the equivalent of handing them a fully solved, neatly packaged, career-making conviction. The paperwork was mathematically perfect. The evidence was irrefutable. The dossier guaranteed a multi-agency raid on Samira's boutique before she could ever open her doors to the public. I stared at the thick black binder resting on the table. It represented the absolute end of her empire and the permanent loss of her freedom. The trap was fully loaded. It was time to hand it to the hunters. I leave the glass-walled safe house before dawn and drive to a secondary financial institution located on the quiet northern edge of the city. This is not First National, where Samira executed her arrogant forgery. This is a secure private depository that has managed my independent accounts for 3 decades. I bypass the main lobby and present my credentials to the vault manager. The heavy steel door slides open, sealing me inside the silent, climate-controlled archive. I slide my key into the brass lock of box number 412. I pull the long metal container from the wall and open the lid. Inside rests a collection of dark velvet boxes. These do not contain simple financial assets. They hold Gwen's heirloom jewelry. I open the largest case and trace my thumb over the diamond and sapphire necklace I purchased for her the day Evan was born. Beside it rests her grandmother's vintage emerald ring and the gold bracelets she wore to every family milestone. Samira's impending arrest will inevitably trigger a catastrophic financial implosion. When the federal authorities freeze the boutique's fraudulent accounts, a swarm of aggressive commercial creditors and bankruptcy lawyers will begin searching frantically for any remaining capital attached to our family name. I refuse to allow my late wife's legacy to become collateral damage in Samira's impending ruin. I will not let these deeply personal artifacts be seized, cataloged, and auctioned off to cover the fraudulent catering bills of a luxury vanity project. I carefully transfer every velvet case from the metal box into a heavy canvas duffel bag. I close the empty container, lock the compartment, and sign the exit ledger. I carry Gwen's history out of the bank and lock it securely in the trunk of my rental car. Her memory is now permanently shielded from the blast radius of the collapsing trust. I return to the safe house where Mitchell is already waiting at the dining table with the next phase of our defensive perimeter prepared. Delivering the federal dossier will completely obliterate Samira, but we must anticipate the secondary shockwave. When the federal agents drag his wife out of her boutique in handcuffs, Evan will experience total financial and social ruin. A desperate, bankrupt man cornered by public humiliation will inevitably look for a lifeline. Mitchell warns me that Evan's defense attorneys might attempt to launch a desperate, frivolous lawsuit against my remaining personal wealth, resurrecting Samira's fabricated claims of my mental incompetence to seize my independent capital. We will not leave a single dollar exposed to that threat. Mitchell has spent the last 48 hours establishing a highly fortified corporate holding company. It is legally incorporated in an offshore jurisdiction known for impenetrable financial privacy laws. We sit at the glass table and begin executing the massive digital transfers. Every legitimate property deed, every liquid cash reserve, and my entire independent investment portfolio are systematically moved out of my personal name and transferred directly into the anonymous corporate shield. I signed the final digital authorizations legally severing the financial umbilical cord between myself and the son who betrayed me. I am effectively erasing my personal financial footprint from the domestic registry. By the time Evan's legal team attempts to file a single desperation injunction against my estate, they will find nothing but empty accounts and absolute dead ends. The concrete wall around my remaining wealth is now 10 feet high and topped with razor wire. The grand opening of the boutique is exactly 48 hours away. From the absolute security of the safe house, Mitchell and I monitor the final frenzied buildup of Samira's doomed enterprise. She is completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs currently resting squarely on her chest. Interpreting my silence as total surrender, she launches a massive and incredibly aggressive social media campaign. Mitchell projects her digital footprint onto the large monitor. High-definition promotional videos flood the internet. Samira tags local politicians, elite city socialites, and prominent fashion influencers demanding their presence at her triumph. She is actively ensuring maximum public visibility for her own destruction. She orders custom red carpets rolled out across the commercial sidewalk and hires a private security firm to manage the anticipated paparazzi and eager crowds. She posts a live stream from the center of her showroom, standing proudly amidst imported silk garments and display cases filled with the stolen diamonds. She boasts to her thousands of followers about her visionary business acumen and her flawless aesthetic taste. She even has the absolute audacity to thank her supportive husband and vaguely mention the foundational family wealth that made her dream possible. She is meticulously setting the stage for a spectacular tragedy. Mitchell receives a brief encrypted message from his contact at the federal prosecutor's office. The strike team is fully briefed and mobilized. They have intentionally decided not to interrupt her preparations. The authorities are simply waiting for the boutique doors to open. They are allowing Samira to gather the city's wealthiest and most influential citizens into one brightly lit room before they execute the federal arrest warrants. She is inviting the entire city to watch her fall. The bait is taken, the trap is locked, and the final countdown has officially begun. Mitchell navigated the rental sedan through the concrete labyrinth of the city's financial district, descending into the subterranean parking garage of the federal courthouse. This was not a municipal precinct filled with tired local detectives handling domestic disputes. It was a highly secure, heavily fortified facility designed to dismantle the exact type of corporate syndicate Samira was attempting to build. We bypassed the standard public entry protocols and metal detectors entirely. Mitchell had spent his entire career cultivating highly placed assets in rooms where absolute power operated in the shadows. He led me through a maze of secure corridors, our footsteps echoing against the linoleum until we reached a windowless conference room on the 7th floor. A man was already waiting for us at the far end of a long steel table. Special Agent Vance Reynolds did not wear a uniform or a badge. He wore a rumpled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and carried the distinct, predatory energy of a man who hunted white-collar criminals for a living. Reynolds possessed a notorious reputation within the Bureau for ruthlessly prosecuting wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering. He did not offer us coffee or engage in basic social pleasantries. Mitchell and Reynolds had a quiet, unspoken history forged in previous corporate wars. Reynolds knew Mitchell would never bring a civilian into this specific building unless the prey was massive and the evidence was bulletproof. I stepped forward, unzipped my heavy canvas duffel bag, and pulled out the thick black binder. I placed it squarely in the center of the metal table and slid it across the cold surface until it rested precisely in front of the agent. I told Reynolds that the dossier contained a fully documented multi-million-dollar international fraud operation. I explained that the architect of this syndicate was currently operating under a fabricated medical conservatorship to liquidate my remaining physical assets and bury her tracks. Reynolds stared at the thick spine of the binder. He did not ask me why a retired concrete contractor was handing him a finished federal investigation. He simply opened the heavy black cover and began to read. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute as Reynolds turned the pages. I watched his eyes scan the meticulously organized evidence, absorbing the sheer scale of Samira's arrogance. He stopped at the forensic analysis provided by Arthur Vance. He traced his finger over the microscopic breakdown of Evan's forged signature on the $2 million commercial loan. A sharp, humorless smile touched the corners of his mouth. Forging a signature on a standard personal check was a localized issue that might result in probation. Forging a signature to extract 7 figures from a federally insured banking institution was an entirely different legal beast. It triggered immediate federal jurisdiction under aggressive bank fraud statutes. Reynolds flipped to the third section of the binder and studied the shadow ledgers we had extracted from Neil. The agent's posture shifted instantly from casual interest to intense predatory focus. He read the specific routing numbers outlining how Samira had aggressively funneled the stolen trust capital through offshore shell companies. She had wired hundreds of thousands of dollars to European catering syndicates and Asian textile manufacturers under the guise of legitimate corporate expenses. Reynolds looked up from the table, removing his glasses. He stated that the money laundering ledgers elevated the case from standard domestic embezzlement to a massive federal syndicate crime. Every single international wire transfer she authorized carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. The sheer magnitude of the documented fraud eradicated any possibility of a standard plea deal. She had tied the stolen funds directly to publicly visible physical assets that the government could immediately seize and liquidate. Reynolds closed the binder with a heavy, echoing thud. He declared that he possessed enough actionable evidence to secure a dozen federal indictments from a grand jury before sunset. The trap was mathematically perfect. He reached for his encrypted phone to mobilize an immediate tactical raid on the boutique. He wanted to shatter the glass doors and seize her digital servers before she could move another stolen dollar. Mitchell placed his hand flat on the black binder and stopped the federal agent from making the call. Striking the boutique prematurely was a catastrophic tactical error. We needed maximum exposure to ensure total destruction. Mitchell explained that executing an immediate raid in an empty locked showroom would provide Samira with a vital tactical advantage. She would inevitably hire an aggressive defense attorney and claim the offshore transfers were a catastrophic accounting error committed entirely by her disgruntled lead controller. She would attempt to use her vast social influence to spin a public narrative of a tragic corporate misunderstanding, painting herself as the victim of poor management. We could not allow her the silence to control the narrative. Mitchell proposed a far more devastating operational timeline. The grand opening of the boutique was scheduled to commence in exactly 48 hours. Samira had spent a stolen fortune guaranteeing the attendance of local politicians, wealthy investors, and elite city socialites. She was actively constructing the ultimate stage for her own public execution. Mitchell argued that hitting the boutique during the exact height of the grand opening completely eliminated her flight risk. She would be entirely surrounded by a massive crowd, blinded by flashing camera lights and physically cornered by her own vanity. A high-profile arrest in front of her most crucial financial backers would permanently eradicate her social shield and destroy her reputation instantly. The federal agents would seize her servers, freeze her accounts, and confiscate her imported inventory while her prestigious guests watched in absolute horror. Reynolds analyzed the tactical proposition, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the sheer psychological brutality of the strategy. A quiet arrest allowed a criminal to fight in the shadows, but a highly public raid dismantled their entire network permanently. Reynolds nodded slowly in absolute agreement. He instructed his tactical team to prepare the warrants and coordinate the transport vehicles for Friday evening. They would allow Samira to cut the velvet ribbon, pour the expensive champagne, and bask in the false glory of her stolen empire. They would wait until she felt completely invincible. The federal strike team would breach the front doors the very second she raised her glass to toast her victory. The street outside the boutique is completely transformed into a carnival of stolen wealth. Mitchell and I sit in the heavy darkness of the unmarked rental sedan parked half a block away. The tinted windows shield us from the blinding glare of the paparazzi flashbulbs. Samira did not simply rent a storefront, she commandeered the entire block. A custom crimson carpet stretches from the polished glass doors of her showroom all the way to the curb. Valets in crisp black uniforms scramble to open the doors of arriving luxury vehicles. Maseratis and imported sports cars line the street like a fleet of expensive trophies. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the boutique, I can see the sheer volume of my liquidated trust funds on display. Massive crystal chandeliers hang from the industrial ceiling, casting a brilliant fracturing light over racks of imported silk garments and locked glass cases filled with diamond jewelry. Waiters in immaculate white jackets circulate through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with exotic caviar and pouring endless streams of vintage French champagne. The city's absolute elite have arrived precisely on time. Local politicians seeking wealthy donors, prominent socialites, desperate for relevance, and fashion influencers broadcasting the event to millions of followers cram into the brightly lit space. They laugh and drink completely oblivious to the fact that they are standing inside a massive, highly illegal money laundering operation. They believe they are celebrating Samira's brilliant aesthetic vision and her sharp business acumen. They are actually drinking champagne purchased with the concrete and sweat of my entire adult life. Mitchell rests a secure digital radio on the dashboard. It hums with the quiet, encrypted chatter of the federal strike team. Special Agent Reynolds has positioned 3 unmarked tactical vans in the dark alley directly behind the boutique. The agents are fully geared and holding their positions. We are not rushing the timeline. We are allowing the room to fill to absolute capacity. We are letting the balloon inflate until the tension is unbearable. Mitchell taps the screen of his encrypted tablet. He has accessed a live digital broadcast of the grand opening streamed directly from the phone of a prominent fashion blogger standing in the center of the showroom floor. The high-definition audio feeds clearly through the speakers of our sedan. The loud pulsing music abruptly fades. The dense crowd falls into an expectant, glittering silence. The camera pans toward the center of the room, focusing on a raised marble platform. My son stands there holding a crystal flute of champagne. Evan is wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo that perfectly matches the opulent surroundings. He looks handsome, successful, and entirely foolish. He taps a silver spoon against the delicate rim of his glass to command the room's attention. He begins his speech with a charming, rehearsed smile. He looks directly at his wife and praises her relentless drive, her unyielding artistic vision, and her brilliant business mind. He tells the crowd of elite investors and politicians how incredibly proud he is to stand beside a self-made mogul. The tragic irony of his monologue is physically nauseating to witness. Evan has absolutely no idea that he legally owes $2 million for the fraudulent commercial enterprise he is currently celebrating. He does not know that the forensic document examiner has mathematically proven his signature was forged by the very woman he is smiling at. He believes he is the supportive partner to a rising corporate star. He is entirely blind to the fact that he is standing on a massive financial landmine wired directly to federal wire fraud statutes. He speaks warmly about the importance of family support and the heavy sacrifices required to build a lasting legacy. He mentions the solid foundation his father provided, completely unaware that his wife had planned to lock me inside a psychiatric ward just to steal the deed to his childhood home. He raises his glass to the cheering crowd drinking the stolen champagne, completely oblivious to the federal agents waiting in the alley just 50 feet away. The crowd erupts into polite, expensive applause as Evan finishes his toast. He steps back and hands the microphone to Samira. She glides to the center of the marble platform. She is wearing a custom silver gown that shimmers under the harsh light of the crystal chandeliers. She looks radiant, powerful, and absolutely untouchable. She commands the room with the practiced ease of a woman who believes she has conquered the world. She begins her address by thanking the city's elite for their unwavering support. Her voice echoes clearly through the tablet speakers in our dark car. She speaks eloquently about overcoming massive structural obstacles and breaking through outdated barriers to build a modern empire. Every word she speaks is a carefully constructed lie designed to inflate her own mythology. She talks about the incredible burden of building a business from the ground up, demanding applause for a struggle she never actually experienced. She smiles brilliantly for the flashing cameras of the local press. She looks directly into the lens of the live stream, projecting total supremacy. She genuinely believes she has executed the perfect bloodless coup. She assumes my commercial properties are firmly locked within her control. She believes the eviction notice on my front door will generate the exact liquid cash required to balance her offshore accounts by Monday morning. She thinks my spirit is permanently broken and that I am sitting in silent defeat waiting to be hauled away to a memory care facility. Her hubris reaches its absolute intoxicating peak. She raises her crystal glass high above her head and invites the entire city to toast to her unstoppable future. She drinks the champagne with a victorious, gleaming smile. She has successfully stolen my life to fund hers, and she is basking in the applause of the people she intends to use next. Mitchell reaches out and turns the volume down on the tablet. He picks up the encrypted radio from the dashboard. He presses the transmission button. He utters a single quiet word to Special Agent Reynolds. The federal strike team is officially cleared to breach the perimeter. I open the heavy door of the rental sedan and step out into the cool night air. I am not wearing the worn canvas coat of a defeated old man. I am dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit cut from pure wool, a garment I have not worn since Gwen's funeral. I adjust my cuffs and walk toward the boutique. The private security guards at the end of the crimson carpet step aside, confused by my absolute projection of authority. I pull open the massive glass doors of the showroom. The atmosphere inside is suffocatingly dense with the smell of expensive perfume and imported lilies. The pulsing bass of the ambient music vibrates through the polished concrete floors. I do not shuffle. I do not hesitate. My spine is perfectly straight and my steps are measured, echoing with the heavy, undeniable rhythm of a man reclaiming his territory. The elite socialites and wealthy investors closest to the entrance turn to look at me. The bright, artificial joy in their eyes dissolves into immediate confusion. They sense the sudden violent shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. The crowd begins to part organically, stepping back to clear a path as I walk directly toward the raised marble platform. A sound technician standing near the audio equipment notices the disruption spreading through the crowd. He panics and drops the volume slider. The loud pulsing music abruptly falters, fading into an awkward, jagged silence. Heads turn one by one. The clinking of crystal glasses ceases. The laughter dies in the throats of the city's politicians and fashion influencers. They stare at the man walking through their glittering epicenter with the cold, unyielding momentum of a concrete pillar. I keep my eyes locked entirely on the marble stage at the center of the room. Samira is frozen mid-sentence, the microphone still raised near her face. Her triumphant smile stretches tight across her features, instantly transforming from an expression of supreme arrogance into a grotesque mask of sheer terror. I walk past the diamond display cases and the racks of stolen silk, leaving a wake of absolute silence behind me. I stop exactly at the edge of the marble platform, stepping fully into the harsh glare of the crystal chandeliers. Samira stares down at me from her elevated position. The polished microphone slips from her trembling fingers and hits the platform with a loud electronic screech that makes the surrounding guests flinch. Her other hand goes slack. The crystal champagne flute drops, colliding against the hard marble floor. It shatters instantly, sending a spray of expensive vintage wine and glittering shards across the tips of her designer shoes. She cannot process the reality standing before her. She expects a broken, disoriented old man wandering blindly in search of a memory care facility. Instead, she is facing the architect of her destruction. Evan reacts with a surge of panicked, misguided adrenaline. He rushes down the 2 marble steps, placing himself between his wife and my unyielding presence. He grabs my right bicep, attempting to apply a firm guiding pressure to steer me back toward the exit. His face is pale and sweating profusely under the bright showroom lights. He leans in close, his breath reeking of alcohol and cowardice. He whispers frantically into my ear, telling me that I do not belong here. He reminds me of my handwritten letter insisting that the medical transport van is waiting at his townhouse to take me to Dr. Thorne's psychiatric facility. He treats me like a fragile, confused patient having a public episode. He begs me to leave before I embarrass the family any further. I do not break eye contact with Samira. I raise my left arm and brush Evan's hand away from my suit jacket with a single violent motion. The physical dismissal is absolute and entirely uncompromising. Evan stumbles backward, completely shocked by the raw physical strength of a man he believed to be physically deteriorating. I speak to him, but my voice is projected clearly enough for the entire front row of wealthy investors to hear. I tell him to stand down. I inform him that the only people leaving this building tonight will be escorted by federal agents. The remaining color drains from Evan's face. He looks at my tailored suit, my steady hands, and my unwavering gaze. The false narrative of my senility evaporates from his mind instantly. He realizes with a sickening jolt of clarity that he has walked blindly into a meticulously constructed trap. He steps aside, his shoulders slumping in total defeat, leaving his wife entirely exposed. I reach inside the interior breast pocket of my suit jacket. I extract a thick, folded stack of legal documents. I do not hand them to Samira. She is already a ghost, a convicted criminal simply waiting for her handcuffs. I hold the paperwork out to my son. I command him to take it. Evan reaches out with trembling fingers and accepts the heavy stack of paper. I instruct him to read the top page aloud. It is the sworn affidavit from Arthur Vance, the independent forensic document examiner. Evan stares at the bright red legal seal and the dense paragraphs detailing the exact biomechanics of a right-handed forgery. I watch his eyes scan the text, tracking the irrefutable scientific proof that his own wife traced his signature to steal $2 million from a federally insured bank. I tell him to turn to the second page. It is the original reversion clause I had secretly embedded into the estate trust 5 years ago. I watch his lips silently form the words as he comprehends the absolute legal collapse of his financial reality. The clause clearly dictates that the moment Samira's fraudulent ink touched the bank loan, the entire commercial property reverted instantly and irrevocably back to my sole ownership. I inform him that his wife does not own a single brick of this building. She is operating an illegal enterprise using stolen capital on property she has no legal right to occupy. I tell him to look at the final pages. He sees the printed spreadsheets of the shadow ledgers, the undeniable proof of offshore shell companies and massive international wire fraud. The entire room has fallen into a dead, suffocating silence. 100 of the city's most influential citizens stand frozen, holding their breath as they witness the spectacular real-time implosion of a fraudulent empire. Nobody speaks. Nobody moves toward the exit. The glittering facade of Samira's luxury boutique has been violently ripped away, exposing the rotting criminal foundation underneath. Evan drops the documents onto the floor. The papers scatter across the shattered crystal and spilled champagne. He finally turns to look at his wife, seeing her not as a visionary entrepreneur, but as a ruthless predator who has just destroyed his entire life. Samira opens her mouth to scream a denial, but she is interrupted by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots marching aggressively through the back entrance of the showroom. I turn away from my son's pale, defeated face and address the glittering room. 100 of the city's most influential politicians, aggressive investors, and elite socialites stare back at me in absolute, terrified silence. I do not raise my voice, but I project my words with a cold, resonant clarity that cuts through the stagnant air of the boutique. I announce to the assembled elite that they are not standing inside a visionary commercial enterprise. They are currently drinking vintage champagne inside an active multi-million-dollar federal crime scene. I point directly at the shattered crystal at Samira's feet and state the irrefutable facts. This entire inventory, the massive crystal chandeliers, the imported silk garments, and the locked diamond displays were purchased using capital aggressively stolen from my personal estate. I explain that the woman standing on the marble platform did not build an empire through brilliant business acumen or tireless entrepreneurial grit. She financed her entire luxury vanity project by forging my son's signature on a $2 million commercial bank loan. A collective gasp ripples through the front row of wealthy investors. Several prominent socialites instinctively step backward, physically distancing themselves from the marble stage as if the floor itself is on fire. I declare with absolute, unwavering authority that the fraudulent medical conservatorship they attempted to use to steal my physical freedom has been mathematically and legally dismantled. I announce the immediate and permanent dissolution of the family trust. I state clearly that the reversion clause triggered entirely by their federal wire fraud has officially activated. The commercial property housing this boutique has reverted completely to my sole independent ownership. Samira does not hold a single valid lease or deed to this property. Every silk garment and every diamond resting in the glass cases is currently sitting illegally on my private real estate. The illusion of her inevitable success is completely eradicated, replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of her criminal arrogance. The guests exchange horrified, calculating glances, realizing their social presence has just tied them directly to a massive financial syndicate. The beautiful narrative Samira meticulously constructed for the local press is instantly replaced by the raw, ugly truth of her extreme greed. The silence in the room is suffocating. Samira finally snaps out of her paralyzed, uncomprehending state. The absolute destruction of her carefully curated public image triggers a violent, desperate hysteria. She points a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face and screams at the top of her lungs, demanding that the private security guards remove me from the premises immediately. She commands them to drag me out into the street and throw me off her property. The guards in the crisp black uniform step forward tentatively, their hands reaching for their radios, but they freeze instantly when they see the heavy tactical boots of Special Agent Reynolds' strike team stepping quietly into the dark periphery of the showroom. Before a single guard can lay a hand on my tailored suit jacket, a man in an immaculate white tuxedo pushes his way aggressively through the stunned crowd. It is the head of the luxury catering syndicate Samira hired to service the evening. He does not look apologetic or subservient. He looks absolutely furious. He marches directly to the edge of the marble platform, completely ignoring Samira's frantic, echoing screaming. He raises a digital payment tablet high in the air and announces loudly that the final transaction for tonight's extravagant event has catastrophically failed. Samira's primary offshore corporate card has been aggressively declined. He states that his financial department attempted to run the secondary accounts, and every single financial line attached to the boutique is currently reporting as permanently frozen. The synchronized asset freeze meticulously orchestrated by Mitchell and the federal prosecutor has hit the banking mainframes precisely mid-party. Samira stares down at the glowing red screen of the payment tablet in total unblinking disbelief. She demands that he run the routing numbers again, shrieking that she possesses millions of dollars in liquid capital. The caterer sharply informs her that his bank contact explicitly confirmed a federal hold on all her associated routing numbers. The champagne flowing freely into the crystal glasses suddenly stops. The catering staff, realizing they are serving thousands of dollars of imported caviar for free, immediately begin clearing the silver trays and pulling the expensive bottles from the ice buckets. Samira's command over the room dissolves instantly. She cannot even pay the people hired to pour her drinks. The financial blockade is total and absolute. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, and the stolen equity have been completely severed, leaving her standing on the stage without a single valid cent to her name. The realization hits the wealthy crowd with the terrifying force of a physical blow. The elite politicians and prominent socialites understand instantly that they are standing inside a collapsing federal trap. The immediate presence of frozen offshore accounts and forged commercial bank loans transforms this glamorous grand opening into a highly toxic legal hazard. Nobody in this room wants to be photographed by the paparazzi or questioned by federal agents while holding a glass of champagne purchased with stolen laundered money. The polite, hushed whispers erupt into panicked, urgent conversations. The mass exodus begins immediately, devoid of any social grace. A prominent city councilman drops his half-empty flute on a velvet display table and walks swiftly toward the glass doors, frantically signaling his entire political entourage to follow him. The fashion influencers who just minutes ago were broadcasting Samira's brilliance to millions of followers suddenly lower their phones and scramble for the exit, desperate to delete their live streams before their personal brands are permanently associated with a massive white-collar criminal syndicate. The red carpet outside becomes a chaotic, pushing bottleneck of luxury guests fleeing the premises. The valets struggle wildly to retrieve the Maseratis and imported sports cars fast enough to accommodate the frantic, terrified retreat. Inside the showroom, the massive crystal chandeliers shine down on an increasingly empty, abandoned floor. The carefully constructed empire disintegrates completely in less than 3 minutes. The room that was previously packed with adoring admirers is now a barren wasteland of forgotten coats, spilled red wine, and fleeing shadows. Evan remains completely motionless, watching the city's absolute elite sprint away from his wife as if she is actively contagious. Samira falls heavily to her knees on the cold marble platform, surrounded entirely by the shattered remains of her crystal champagne flute. She watches her wealthy investors disappear through the glass doors, taking her entire fabricated future with them. The false, glittering kingdom she built on the foundation of my stolen concrete has been brutally leveled to the ground. She possesses no money, no social shield, and absolutely no remaining allies to protect her. The room is finally empty of all civilians. Special Agent Reynolds steps fully into the harsh light of the chandeliers, his gold badge prominently displayed on his belt, accompanied by a dozen heavily armed federal agents. The hunters have officially taken the stage. The heavy tactical boots of Special Agent Reynolds' strike team shatter the remaining silence in the showroom. 12 heavily armed federal agents fan out across the marble floor, securing the perimeter with practiced military precision. They immediately block the glass exits, intercepting the few lingering socialites and establishing absolute control over the crime scene. Evan does not look at them. He remains frozen over the scattered documents resting amidst the spilled champagne and broken crystal. He slowly drops to his knees, his expensive velvet tuxedo soaking up the ruined wine. His trembling hands reach out to gather the damp pages. He pulls the forensic affidavit back up to his face. I watch his eyes dart frantically across the dense paragraphs provided by Arthur Vance. He is reading the microscopic breakdown of his own name. He stares at the undeniable mathematical proof that his signature on the $2 million commercial loan is a jagged, aggressive forgery. The reality of his situation violently reconfigures itself in his mind. He looks at the shadow ledgers tracing the routing numbers that detail the international wire transfers. The sheer magnitude of the federal debt drops onto his shoulders like an anvil. He suddenly understands that Samira did not merely steal from my estate to fund her luxury vanity project. She used his name, his legal identity, and his credit to construct the entire fraudulent empire. She has intentionally positioned him as the primary signatory on a massive federal money laundering syndicate. She built her untouchable status by tying the legal noose entirely around his neck. Evan slowly turns his head to look at his wife. Samira is still kneeling on the marble platform, surrounded by federal agents who are systematically confiscating her digital tablets and communication devices. Her mascara is running and her flawless facade is completely destroyed. She does not look back at him. She is frantically attempting to negotiate with a federal officer, shifting blame and offering immediate compliance. Evan watches her desperately spinning lies to save herself. The brilliant visionary entrepreneur he praised in his toast has evaporated. He finally sees the ruthless predator who hollowed out his family, isolated him from his father, and traded his freedom for a custom red carpet. The devastating truth registers in his hollow expression. He is legally tethered to $2 million in fraudulent debt, and the federal government is standing inside the room. Evan drops the damp, incriminatory pages onto the marble floor. He pushes himself up from his knees, his velvet tuxedo stained and ruined. He turns his back entirely on his wife and stumbles toward me. The arrogant posture of a successful businessman has completely vanished, replaced instantly by the desperate pleading body language of a frightened child. He closes the distance between us, his hands outstretched, searching for the reliable safety net that has protected him from consequence his entire life. He grabs the sleeve of my tailored charcoal suit. His grip is tight, frantic. He looks into my eyes, completely ignoring the federal agents moving methodically through the racks of imported silk garments behind him. He begins to beg. The words spill out of his mouth in a rapid, pathetic torrent of excuses and deflections. He insists that he knew absolutely nothing about the forged documents or the offshore shell companies. He claims Samira manipulated his trust, handled all the corporate filings, and deliberately kept him in the dark. He attempts to completely absolve himself of the financial ruin surrounding us. He tells me that the federal authorities will inevitably hold him accountable as the primary signatory on the bank loan. He states that he is facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud he did not explicitly commit. He tightens his grip on my arm. He asks me to deploy the offshore corporate holding company Mitchell established. He knows I possess the liquid capital to instantly erase the $2 million deficit. He pleads with me to wire the funds to First National Bank, clear the fraudulent ledger, and satisfy the federal investigators before they initiate formal prosecution. He appeals directly to my paternal instinct. He reminds me of the decades I spent pouring concrete and breaking my back to secure his future. He tells me that a father cannot watch his only son be destroyed by a manipulative woman. He expects the same endless reservoir of sacrifice that paid for his elite education, his luxury vehicles, and his pristine townhouse. He is demanding that I completely liquidate my remaining independence to purchase his freedom. He looks at me with wide, terrified eyes, absolutely certain that my love for him will override the brutal reality of his actions. He believes my bank accounts are still his ultimate sanctuary. I look down at the hands gripping my suit jacket. I do not feel a single surge of paternal warmth or protective instinct. I feel nothing but a cold, absolute detachment. I raise my right hand and deliberately peel his fingers off my sleeve, breaking his physical hold. I step back, establishing a rigid, undeniable boundary between us. I look directly into his terrified eyes. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the flat, unyielding tone of a judge delivering a final verdict. I remind him of the specific documents he signed 48 hours ago. I recount the medical conservatorship he authorized with Dr. Eris Thorne. I detail the precise legal mechanism he deployed to declare me mentally incompetent, strip away my civil rights, and lock me inside a locked psychiatric ward. I state clearly that a man who actively conspires to imprison his own father in a medical facility to expedite an inheritance forfeits any right to claim paternal protection. I tell him that he stood silently by while his wife plotted to steal the very house where he was raised. He chose to align himself with extreme greed, and now he must pay the absolute cost of that allegiance. I inform him that my offshore accounts are permanently sealed and entirely inaccessible to his crisis. My charity is completely exhausted. I will not spend a single cent of my remaining wealth to untangle the federal knot he allowed his wife to tie around his neck. I tell him that the concrete foundation I built for him was meant to support a man, not shield a coward from the law. I watch the final remaining spark of hope extinguish in his eyes. He realizes that the safety net has been permanently removed. I turn my body away from him, breaking our connection entirely. I look toward the center of the room. Special Agent Reynolds steps forward, flanked by 2 armed officers carrying heavy steel restraints. Reynolds informs Evan that his signature on the fraudulent commercial documents makes him a primary target of the federal indictment. The agents close in around my son. I do not intervene. I do not look back. I stand silently in the harsh light of the crystal chandeliers and watch the federal authorities place Evan in handcuffs. The reckoning is absolute, and he is facing it entirely alone. The heavy glass doors of the boutique swing open with brutal force, shattering the fragile quiet that followed the mass exodus of the city elite. Federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI flood the meticulously designed showroom. They move with devastating synchronized precision, operating on a strictly coordinated timeline. 2 agents immediately secure the main entrance, physically blocking the few remaining stragglers and locking down the perimeter to prevent any destruction of evidence. Another element of the strike team sweeps the back corridors with heavy flashlights and breaching tools. They completely ignore the racks of stolen imported silk and head straight for the financial nerve center of the operation. I watch from the edge of the marble platform as they systematically dismantle Samira's digital infrastructure. A tactical officer easily overrides the electronic keypad on the back office door. They carry heavy, black Pelican cases into the room to secure the primary network servers and backup drives. On the main floor, agents aggressively disconnect the sleek, modern point-of-sale registers, pulling the thick power cables directly from the polished walls. Every single hard drive, every printed receipt ledger, and every digital record of her international money laundering syndicate is systematically bagged, sealed, and tagged as federal evidence. The pristine, highly curated aesthetic of the luxury boutique is completely violated by the harsh, uncompromising reality of federal law enforcement. The massive crystal chandeliers now illuminate investigators methodically photographing the locked diamond display cases for impending asset forfeiture. Samira remains on her knees, her custom silver gown pooling around her on the cold marble floor. She stares in catatonic horror as the agents physically dismantle the physical manifestation of her extreme vanity. The illusion of her untouchable social and financial status is entirely shattered. She truly believed she was building a permanent commercial dynasty, but she was merely assembling a perfectly organized, highly visible crime scene for the federal government. Special Agent Reynolds stands in the exact center of the showroom, directing his tactical team with quiet, absolute authority. The raid is bloodless but incredibly violent in its relentless efficiency. They strip away her offshore corporate shielding in a matter of minutes. The international accounts are frozen, the physical inventory is seized, and the digital ledgers are fully compromised. The concrete foundation I built over 4 decades has been permanently severed from her control. The trap has snapped shut with terrifying mathematical finality. Special Agent Reynolds steps onto the marble platform towering over the architect of the syndicate. He looks down at Samira with absolute professional detachment. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. He recites the Miranda warning with a loud, unwavering cadence that echoes off the glass walls. He informs her that she is under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and international money laundering. The harsh recitation of her constitutional rights finally breaks through her catatonic shock. Samira erupts into a violent feral panic. She scrambles backward across the marble floor, her expensive gown tearing against the sharp shards of the shattered champagne flute. She refuses to surrender her wrists to the federal agent. She thrashes wildly, striking out with her manicured hands and screaming that this is a catastrophic mistake. She demands that they check her offshore corporate filings, still blindly believing that her fabricated wealth provides diplomatic immunity against the law. When Reynolds grabs her left arm to apply the restraint, she screams for her husband. She shrieks Evan's name, ordering him to use his legal expertise to stop the arrest. She commands him to call their defense attorneys and throw me out of the building. Evan does not move a single muscle. He stands completely frozen at the edge of the stage, utterly broken by the crushing weight of the forensic evidence. He looks at his wife writhing on the floor, recognizing her entirely as the predator who destroyed his life. He offers absolutely no protection. He does not speak. He simply watches as two additional agents step forward to assist Reynolds. They overpower her frantic resistance instantly. The sharp metallic click of the steel cuffs locking around her wrists echoes through the showroom. They pull her roughly to her feet. The polished, elegant socialite has been replaced by a disheveled, hysterical criminal. The agents march her firmly toward the front exit. The paparazzi and local press, drawn by the sudden arrival of the tactical vans, are swarming the sidewalk. Samira is dragged through the heavy glass doors and shoved directly into the blinding barrage of camera flashes. The entire city is currently photographing her public destruction. Her meticulously curated empire ends in the back of a dark federal transport van. The chaos of the arrest slowly settles into the methodical, quiet rhythm of a secured federal crime scene. A secondary team of agents stretches thick yellow barricade tape across the shattered entrance of the boutique, officially sealing the property under government jurisdiction. I stand near the center of the dismantled showroom, watching the flashing red and blue lights of the tactical vehicles reflect brightly across the polished marble floors. The crystal chandeliers are switched off, plunging the opulent space into harsh tactical shadows. Evan has not moved from his spot. He remains staring blankly at the empty space where his wife was just detained. Special Agent Reynolds approaches him with a different, more analytical energy. He does not draw handcuffs for my son. Instead, he informs Evan that he is being officially detained for intensive federal questioning regarding the forged signature on the $2 million commercial loan. Reynolds states clearly that Evan must explain his exact level of involvement in the shadow ledgers and the offshore shell companies. Because Samira tied his legal identity to every single fraudulent transaction, he is currently a primary suspect in a massive international syndicate. Two agents step forward and flank him on either side. They instruct him to walk toward the exit. Evan does not resist. The arrogant, wealthy lawyer who had confidently plotted to lock me inside a psychiatric ward is completely gone. His shoulders are slumped and his steps are heavy, shuffling like a man walking toward a firing squad. He finally looks back at me as the agents guide him toward the glass doors. He searches my face for any lingering trace of paternal rescue, any sign that I will liquidate my anonymous corporate shield to save him from federal prosecution. I offer him nothing. I meet his terrified gaze with eyes entirely devoid of charity or forgiveness. He broke the sacred covenant of our family the moment he chose extreme greed over my freedom. I stand firmly on the concrete foundation I reclaimed and watch the agents escort him out into the cold night air. They open the back door of an unmarked dark sedan and guide him inside. The door slams shut with a heavy metallic thud. The engine roars to life. I watch the vehicle merge into the city traffic, carrying my son away to face the absolute unyielding consequences of his betrayal. Exactly 1 week passes after the federal strike team shattered the glass doors of the luxury boutique. The fallout from the raid is swift, absolute, and entirely merciless. Samira is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, having been denied bail due to the massive international scope of her wire fraud and the undeniable flight risk posed by her offshore contacts. Her carefully curated empire has been reduced to a catalog of seized assets and a mountain of federal indictments. Evan has been legally and financially obliterated. He is facing years of relentless bankruptcy litigation, drowning under the $2 million of fraudulent debt his wife tied directly to his name. He has been completely abandoned by his elite social circle and is now entirely separated from his incarcerated wife, relying on an overworked public defender to navigate the wreckage of his life. I do not track his daily struggles. I leave the glass safe house in the city and drive back to my quiet suburban neighborhood. The street looks exactly the same as it did the day I left, but the atmospheric pressure has completely changed. I park my rental sedan in the driveway and walk up the concrete path toward the front door. The bright orange eviction notice that Samira's aggressive attorneys taped to the wood is still hanging there, fluttering weakly in the morning breeze. I reach out, tear the heavy paper from the door, and crumple it in my fist. It is nothing but a meaningless scrap of garbage. Mitchell's brilliant corporate shielding and the immediate activation of the reversion clause have entirely nullified their conspiracy. The commercial properties, the liquid capital, and this residential deed have been fully and permanently restored to my sole legal possession. Every financial mechanism they attempted to weaponize against me has been dismantled with mathematical precision. The offshore holding company remains perfectly intact, an impenetrable fortress guarding my independent wealth. I unlock the front door and step across the threshold, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and polished floors. The battle is officially over and the territory is entirely mine. I walk slowly through the quiet rooms of the house. The silence here used to be deeply comforting, a soft blanket of decades-long memories, but the air now carries the cold, distinct echo of a profound betrayal. I stand in the center of the living room and look at the spaces where my life happened. This is the exact room where I raised my son. This is the same floor where he learned to walk. It is also the exact spot where he sat across from me and secretly plotted to strip away my civil rights, liquidate my foundation, and lock me inside a psychiatric ward. The structural integrity of the walls remains flawless, but the warmth has been permanently extinguished. The house has been irreversibly tainted by the conspiracy. It is no longer a home. It is simply a structure made of timber and drywall. I realize with absolute clarity that holding on to this property means holding on to the ghost of the son who tried to destroy me. I walk to the mantelpiece and carefully pick up the last remaining photograph of Gwen. It is a simple, silver-framed picture of us smiling on a coastal vacation 30 years ago. I wrap it securely in protective material and place it inside my leather travel bag, resting it gently next to the velvet boxes of her heirloom jewelry. I leave the heavy wooden dining table, the vintage armchairs, and the antique rugs exactly where they are. I do not need them. I carry my travel bag to the front door, just as a sharp professional knock breaks the silence. It is a premium real estate agent I contracted 72 hours ago. I open the door and step out onto the porch. I pull the heavy oak door shut behind me and turn the key until the deadbolt engages with a solid metallic click. I turn to the agent and hand the brass keys directly into his palm. I instruct him to list the property immediately and sell it fully furnished. I do not care about negotiating for maximum market value. I only care about severing the physical ties permanently. I turn my back on the house for the last time and walk toward my car without a single trace of hesitation. I merge onto the eastbound highway, driving steadily away from the sprawling concrete infrastructure of the city. The towering glass skyscrapers, the federal courthouses, and the dark alleys of the financial district slowly fade into the rearview mirror. I am leaving behind the shattered boutique, the criminal indictments, and the ruined legacy of a son who chose extreme greed over basic loyalty. I drive for 2 uninterrupted hours, watching the dense urban grid gradually dissolve into open, winding roads bordered by tall pine trees and salt-bleached fences. The air filtering through the ventilation vents becomes noticeably cooler and sharper. I turn the steering wheel, guiding the sedan down a secluded, unpaved gravel driveway hidden behind a dense line of coastal evergreens. At the end of the long path sits a modest, single-story property built from weathered timber and natural stone. The house rests on a slight elevation, looking directly out over the vast, turbulent expanse of the ocean. I purchased this property entirely through my anonymous offshore holding company. It exists completely outside the domestic registry, a ghost property utterly invisible to anyone who might try to search for my name. I step out of the vehicle and close the door. The heavy scent of salt water and pine immediately fills my lungs. The rhythmic crashing sound of the ocean waves breaking against the jagged shoreline provides a constant, powerful bass line. The isolation is absolute. There are no neighbors to monitor my movements, no ambitious lawyers drafting fraudulent conservatorships, and no treacherous family members whispering lies in the dark. I walk up the wooden steps to the back deck and lean against the sturdy railing. I look out at the deep blue horizon stretching endlessly toward the sky. For the past several months, I was forced to weaponize my silence. I used it as a tactical shield to absorb their insults, map their movements, and meticulously dismantle a massive financial syndicate. I used my quiet observation to protect my dignity and permanently secure Gwen's legacy. Now, standing on this secluded coast, the war is definitively over. The trap has been dismantled, the ledger is balanced, and the threat is eradicated. The silence surrounding me is no longer a calculated maneuver or a defensive strategy. It is pure, unbroken peace. I breathe in the clean ocean air, fully stepping into the absolute freedom I have finally earned. 7 days pass. The dust from the federal raid settles into a stark, undeniable reality. The commercial properties are fully restored to my name, the fraudulent deeds erased from the county registry with clinical precision. Evan is facing years of relentless bankruptcy litigation. He remains completely separated from his incarcerated wife, relying on an overworked public defender to navigate the wreckage of his life. I do not track his daily court appearances. I leave the glass safe house in the city and drive back to my old suburban neighborhood. The street looks exactly the same as it did the day I left, but the atmospheric pressure has completely changed. I park my rental sedan in the driveway and walk up the concrete path toward the front door. The bright orange eviction notice that Samira's aggressive attorneys taped to the wood is still hanging there. It flutters weakly in the morning breeze. I reach out, tear the heavy paper from the door, and crumple it in my fist. It is nothing but a meaningless scrap of garbage. Mitchell's brilliant corporate shielding and the immediate activation of the reversion clause have entirely nullified their conspiracy. The commercial properties, the liquid capital, and this residential deed have been fully and permanently restored to my sole legal possession. Every financial mechanism they attempted to weaponize against me has been dismantled. The offshore holding company remains perfectly intact, serving as an impenetrable fortress guarding my independent wealth. I unlock the front door and step across the threshold. I breathe in the familiar scent of old wood and polished floors. The battle is officially over. The territory is entirely mine. I stand in the hallway, letting the profound silence wash over me. It is a different kind of quiet now. The threat of forced medical conservatorship is gone. The looming specter of a nursing home has been eradicated. I won the war they started, using the very laws they tried to twist against me. The house feels massive, stripped of the tension that had suffocated its rooms for the past year. I walk into the kitchen where Evan once sat and casually discussed moving me into a basement unit. The counter where Samira placed her fake real estate brochures is clean and empty. They assumed my age made me blind to their greed. They mistook my paternal patience for senile weakness. Now they are learning that the foundation of a man's life cannot be stolen simply because he has grown gray. I walk back into the living room feeling the absolute weight of my victory. I walk slowly through the quiet rooms of the house. The silence here used to be deeply comforting, a soft blanket of decades-long memories. Now the air carries the cold, distinct echo of a profound betrayal. I stand in the center of the living room and look at the spaces where my life happened. This is the exact room where I raised my son. This is the same floor where he learned to walk. It is also the exact spot where he sat across from me and secretly plotted to strip away my civil rights, liquidate my foundation, and lock me inside a psychiatric ward. The structural integrity of the walls remains flawless, but the warmth has been permanently extinguished. The house has been irreversibly tainted by the conspiracy. It is no longer a home. It is simply a structure made of timber and drywall. I realize with absolute clarity that holding onto this property means holding onto the ghost of the son who tried to destroy me. I walk to the mantelpiece and carefully pick up the last remaining photograph of Gwen. It is a simple silver-framed picture of us smiling on a coastal vacation 30 years ago. I wrap it securely in protective material and place it inside my leather travel bag. I rest it gently next to the velvet boxes of her heirloom jewelry. I leave the heavy wooden dining table, the vintage armchairs, and the antique rugs exactly where they are. I do not need them. I carry my travel bag to the front door just as a sharp, professional knock breaks the silence. It is a premium real estate agent I contracted 72 hours ago. I open the door and step out onto the porch. I pull the heavy oak door shut behind me and turn the key until the deadbolt engages with a solid metallic click. I turn to the agent and hand the brass keys directly into his palm. I instruct him to list the property immediately and sell it fully furnished. I do not care about negotiating for maximum market value. I only care about severing the physical ties permanently. I turn my back on the house for the last time and walk toward my car without a single trace of hesitation. I merge onto the eastbound highway, driving steadily away from the sprawling concrete infrastructure of the city. The towering glass skyscrapers, the federal courthouses, and the dark alleys of the financial district slowly fade into the rearview mirror. I am leaving behind the shattered boutique, the criminal indictments, and the ruined legacy of a son who chose extreme greed over basic loyalty. I drive for 2 uninterrupted hours watching the dense urban grid gradually dissolve into open winding roads bordered by tall pine trees and salt-bleached fences. The air filtering through the ventilation vents becomes noticeably cooler and sharper. I turn the steering wheel, guiding the sedan down a secluded, unpaved gravel driveway hidden behind a dense line of coastal evergreens. At the end of the long path sits a modest, single-story property built from weathered timber and natural stone. The house rests on a slight elevation looking directly out over the vast, turbulent expanse of the ocean. I purchased this property entirely through my anonymous offshore holding company. It exists completely outside the domestic registry, a ghost property utterly invisible to anyone who might try to search for my name. I step out of the vehicle and close the door. The heavy scent of salt water and pine immediately fills my lungs. The rhythmic, crashing sound of the ocean waves breaking against the jagged shoreline provides a constant, powerful baseline. The isolation is absolute. There are no neighbors to monitor my movements. No ambitious lawyers drafting fraudulent conservatorships, and no treacherous family members whispering lies in the dark. I walk up the wooden steps to the back deck and lean against the sturdy railing. I look out at the deep blue horizon, stretching endlessly toward the sky. For the past several months, I was forced to weaponize my silence. I used it as a tactical shield to absorb their insults, map their movements, and meticulously dismantle a massive financial syndicate. I used my quiet observation to protect my dignity and permanently secure Gwen's legacy. Now, standing on this secluded coast, the war is definitively over. The trap has been dismantled, the ledger is balanced, and the threat is eradicated. The silence surrounding me is no longer a calculated maneuver or a defensive strategy. It is pure, unbroken peace. I breathe in the clean ocean air, fully stepping into the absolute freedom I have finally earned. True lasting power does not require loud declarations or public displays of dominance. It thrives in quiet observation, meticulous planning, and unwavering patience. We often mistakenly believe that biological ties guarantee loyalty and respect. However, when greed corrupts those bonds, blood becomes a weapon rather than a shield. The hardest lesson is accepting that sometimes saving yourself means walking away from the people you raised. Dignity is never freely granted by those who seek to exploit you. It must be actively claimed, fiercely protected, and ultimately defended by setting absolute boundaries that no one is ever allowed to cross again. Did this story resonate with you? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for more stories about resilience and reclaiming your life.